You open your eyes to the weight of wool against your face, rough and damp with the frozen breath that has gathered there through the night. The fabric scratches at your cheek, a familiar irritation that has become a strange comfort over these long weeks. You do not move yet. Movement brings cold, and cold brings the full waking consciousness you are not quite ready to bear. So you lie still, listening to the world remake itself around you in the gray hour before dawn, that liminal time when sleep and waking blur into a single prolonged state of endurance. The sound reaches you first, always the sound. A low murmur of wind against canvas, that particular hollow drumming that tells you the tent still stands, that the stakes have held through another night, that the frozen world has not yet reclaimed the small shelter you and your companions have carved from it. Beneath the wind, you hear breathing. Not your own, though yours joins the chorus now as you become aware of it, but the breathing of others. 7 men, packed close in the darkness, each body a small furnace struggling against the immense cold that presses in from every direction. The breathing is not peaceful. It stutters and catches, punctuated by small sounds of discomfort, the shifting of limbs gone numb, the soft groan of someone surfacing briefly from whatever dreams still visit men in such conditions. You are a soldier, though the word feels almost quaint here, far from the training grounds and the castle yards where you first learned to hold a spear. You are part of something larger, an army moving through the winter landscape on a campaign whose purpose has begun to seem as distant and abstract as the warmth of summer. What matters now is simpler. What matters is the next day, the next night, the next small victory of waking to find your fingers still capable of flexing, your toes still sending their dull reports of existence up through the architecture of cold stiffened legs. The tent is not large. In daylight, you could cross it in 4 steps, perhaps 5 if you were careful not to tread on the men arranged along its edges like the petals of some winter flower. It is made of heavy canvas, oiled and treated against moisture. Though moisture finds its way in regardless, condensing on every surface, turning to frost in the coldest hours, creating an interior landscape of delicate ice crystals that catch what little light penetrates the gloom. The canvas is old, patched in a dozen places with scraps of leather and cloth, each patch a testament to previous campaigns, previous winters, previous groups of men who sought refuge beneath its questionable shelter. You share this space with 7 others, and in the darkness, you know each one by the particular quality of their breathing, the specific sounds they make in sleep. There is Edmund, whose breath whistles faintly through a nose broken years ago in some forgotten scuffle. Beside him lies Thomas, who mutters in his sleep, fragments of conversation with invisible companions, words that never quite resolve into meaning. Near the tent's entrance, the position everyone dreads and the men rotate through with a fairness born of shared misery, is young William, who still whimpers sometimes in the depth of night, though he has learned to do it quietly, softly enough that the others can pretend not to hear, and thus preserve what remains of his dignity. You know them by smell, too, though this is a knowledge none would speak of aloud. The tent holds the accumulated odor of 8 men who have not properly bathed in weeks, whose clothes remain perpetually damp, whose bodies have begun to take on the sharp, ferrous scent of cold and fear and endless fatigue. Beneath that human smell lies the odor of wool and canvas, of the oiled leather that makes up much of your equipment, of smoke that has penetrated every fiber of every garment from the countless fires you have huddled around, never quite warm enough, never quite dry. The cold is a presence, as real as any of your companions, more constant than most. It has seeped into your bones over these weeks, taken up residence in the marrow, until you have begun to forget what it feels like to be truly warm. You remember heat, of course, the way one remembers a story told long ago. You remember summer sun on bare arms, the pleasant languor of a warm afternoon, the weight of heat pressing down like a benevolent hand. But the sensation itself has become abstract, disconnected from the immediate reality of your body, which knows only gradations of cold. The sharp bite of wind on exposed skin, the deep ache of cold-stiffened joints, the peculiar burning sensation that comes when frozen fingers begin, reluctantly, to thaw. The army to which you belong is on the march, though march is perhaps too vigorous a word for the slow, grinding progress you make across the winter landscape. You are moving north, toward what objective you are not entirely certain. Orders filter down through the ranks in fragments, distorted by repetition, colored by rumor and speculation. There is an enemy, somewhere ahead or perhaps to the east or possibly already behind you, circling. There is a city to besiege or relieve, a border to secure, a prince to support or oppose. The details shift and blur. and you have learned not to attach too much importance to them. What matters is that the army moves and you move with it, and each night you stop and raise the tents and try to survive until morning. The land through which you travel is locked in winter's deepest grip. Snow lies thick on the ground, transforming the landscape into something alien and hostile. Trees stand like dark sentinels, their branches heavy with ice that chimes softly when the wind stirs. The sky, on the rare occasions when clouds part enough to reveal it, is a pale, washed-out blue, the color of something drained of vitality. The sun, when it appears, seems distant and weak, offering light but precious little warmth, a cold star presiding over a cold world. You have been marching for 23 days, though it might be 24 or 22. You have lost track somewhere in the succession of identical days, each one a repetition of the one before. Wake in darkness. Break camp in darkness. March through the gray dawn into the brief, pale day. Stop as evening gathers. Raise the tents. Eat what food there is. Sleep, or try to. Wake again to darkness. The cycle has become so ingrained that your body moves through it almost without conscious thought, a kind of sleepwalking that extends across days and weeks. The commanders, warm in their larger tents with their braziers and their wine, say the campaign is proceeding according to plan. They say supplies will reach you soon, that reinforcements are coming, that the weather will break any day now. The men, huddled in their inadequate shelters, have learned to smile and nod at such assurances while trusting only in what they can see and touch and verify with their own half-frozen senses. They trust that canvas will provide some measure of shelter. They trust that bodies pressed close together will generate a shared warmth greater than any single body could produce alone. They trust that dawn will come, because it always has, though this trust is perhaps more hope than certainty. You became a soldier 3 years ago, though the path that led you to this frozen tent in this frozen land sometimes seems to belong to another person entirely, someone whose concerns and ambitions you can barely recall. You were the second son of a minor landholder, which meant you were destined for either the church or the sword, and the church held no appeal for a boy who preferred the open sky to vaulted ceilings, the straightforward logic of physical training to the endless subtleties of theological debate. So you took service with a local lord, learned the basics of fighting, how to hold a spear, how to stand in a line, how to follow orders without question or hesitation, and in time found yourself part of the great machine of war that grinds on regardless of season, regardless of cost, regardless of the individual men who make up its moving parts. The tent provides shelter, but it is a relative thing, this shelter. It keeps off the worst of the wind, which is no small mercy when the wind cuts like a blade across the open landscape. It offers some small protection from snow, creating a space where white does not constantly accumulate on your clothing, your face, your tightly closed eyelids. But it does not keep out the cold. Nothing keeps out the cold. The cold finds its way through every seam, every gap in the canvas, every small opening where tent meets ground. It rises up from the earth itself, which is frozen to a depth of several feet, so that even with layers of pine boughs and whatever other insulation you can gather, you feel the chill pressing against your back, your side, whatever part of you touches the ground despite your best efforts to prevent such contact. You sleep, when sleep comes, fully dressed, wearing every piece of clothing you possess. You wear your woolen undertunic, your padded gambeson, your outer tunic, your cloak wrapped tightly around your body and tucked under your legs to prevent it from falling open in the night. You wear your woolen hose, your leather boots with straw stuffed inside for insulation, your woolen mittens on your hands, even though they make it difficult to grasp anything should you need to rise quickly. You wear your woolen cap pulled down over your ears, and over the hood of your cloak. And still you are cold, always cold, the chill finding its way through all these layers as if they were nothing more than cobwebs. Between you and the man lying next to you, tonight it is Edmund, solid and uncomplaining Edmund, who has been a soldier longer than you have been alive. There is a space of perhaps 2 inches. You can feel the heat radiating from his body, precious and vital, and you know he can feel yours. This narrow gap represents a compromise, a careful balance between the need for shared warmth and the equally important need to preserve some final, irreducible boundary of personal space. To close that gap entirely would be to acknowledge a level of desperation that no one is quite ready to name aloud, though everyone knows it lurks just beyond the edge of consciousness, waiting for the night when cold finally overcomes dignity. The ground beneath you is hard, frozen solid, unyielding as stone. Before lying down to sleep, you and your companion spent perhaps half an hour preparing the interior of the tent, spreading pine boughs gathered from the surrounding forest, layering them as thickly as possible to create a barrier between your bodies and the frozen earth. Over the pine boughs you spread whatever else could be found: dried grass, rushes, in some cases simply layers of canvas or cloth or leather, anything to add another fraction of an inch between flesh and frozen ground. And still you feel it, the cold rising up like water seeping through a failing dam, persistent and inexorable. The tent stands at the edge of the army's encampment, which sprawls across a broad, shallow valley, a temporary city of canvas and smoke and stamping horses. There are hundreds of tents, ranging from the small shelters like yours, housing 8 or 10 men packed close, to the great pavilions of the commanders and nobles, large enough to stand upright in, equipped with wooden floors and braziers and all the small comforts that rank provides. Between the tents, narrow paths have been trampled through the snow, creating a maze of passages that the men navigate by memory and feel, especially at night when the darkness is absolute and the few torches and fires provide only small islands of flickering light in a vast sea of black. The army numbers perhaps 3,000 men, though no one knows for certain. Men slip away in the night, deserting when the cold and the endless marching become too much to bear. Others fall to sickness, the coughing plague that has worked its way through the ranks, the flux that leaves men weak and dehydrated, the slow, insidious ailments that come from being perpetually cold and damp and exhausted. Some simply stop, sitting down in the snow during the march and refusing to rise, and after a while the column moves on and leaves them where they sit, because there is no resource to spare for those who cannot keep pace, no surplus of strength to divide among those who have used up their own. You have been fortunate so far. Your body, though pushed to its limits, continues to function. You have avoided the worst of the sickness that circulates through the camp. Your feet, though blistered and aching, have not developed the black rot that comes when cold damages flesh beyond recovery, that creeping death that starts in the toes and works its way upward, forcing the surgeons to cut and cauterize, though often not in time to save the limb or the life. You have seen men lose toes, feet, fingers to the cold, seen the stumps wrapped in cloth already stained with old blood, seen the way these men's eyes go hollow with a knowledge they cannot bear to articulate. The night is not silent, despite the late hour and the exhaustion that presses down on the camp. You hear the wind, always the wind, that low, constant presence that never quite ceases. You hear the occasional stamp of a horse from the picket lines, the creak of canvas as tents shift and settle, the distant call of a sentry marking the hours, his voice thin and lonely in the darkness. Sometimes you hear the wolves, far off in the forest that surrounds the valley, their howling a sound that makes something in your chest constrict, though you know they will not approach the camp with its fires and its human smell. Sometimes you hear the sound of a man weeping, soft and muffled, someone who has reached the limit of his endurance and can no longer maintain the stoic mask that soldiers wear for one another's benefit. You wonder what time it is, how many more hours until dawn, but there is no way to know. The darkness inside the tent is absolute, so complete that you cannot see your hand if you hold it inches from your face. Outside, the darkness is perhaps fractionally less total, relieved by starlight when the clouds permit, by the faint glow of banked fires scattered through the camp. But inside the tent, with the canvas sealed tight against the wind, there is only blackness, and you float in it, suspended between sleep and waking, between past and present, between the person you were and the person this experience is slowly reshaping you into. You open your eyes to the pale wash of morning filtering through canvas overhead, a dim luminescence that tells you nothing of the hour, only that the world beyond this fragile shelter still exists. The fabric sags under the weight of frost, each fold and seam traced in white, and you lie still beneath the furs and wool that have kept the worst of the night from reaching your bones. The air inside the tent holds a peculiar quality, neither warm nor truly frigid, as if suspended between states, waiting for the first movement to tip the balance. Your breath clouds before your face, small ghosts dissipating into the larger cold, and you watch them vanish with a patience born of countless such mornings. There is no urgency in waking here, no sudden call to arms, only the slow acknowledgement that sleep has ended and the day's endurance must begin. Around you, the sounds of camp stir to life with reluctance. Canvas rustles as someone shifts in the adjacent tent. A cough breaks the stillness, wet and deep, followed by the scrape of boot leather against frozen ground. These are the rhythms you have come to know, the cadence of men waking in a landscape that does not welcome them, that tolerates their presence with cold indifference. You sit up slowly, feeling the protest in your shoulders, the stiffness in your lower back where the ground has pressed against you through layers of hide and cloth. The furs slide away and the cold finds you immediately, a sudden intimacy against your chest and arms, and you reach for the gambeson that serves as both armor and second skin, pulling it close. The tent you inhabit measures perhaps 8 feet across, its peak rising just high enough to allow you to stand if you move to the center. It is a structure of remarkable simplicity, born of centuries of trial and error, of men learning to carry shelter on their backs across distances that defy easy comprehension. 2 sturdy poles cross at the apex, their bases planted in the earth or, when the ground proves too frozen, wedged into cairns of stone gathered from the surrounding terrain. Over this frame stretches canvas treated with oil and wax, a fabric that sheds rain and resists wind, but does nothing to halt the cold's patient infiltration. Ropes extend from the tent's corners, anchored by iron stakes driven at angles into whatever surface will accept them. And in places where even iron cannot penetrate, heavy stones serve as anchors, piled atop the rope ends with careful deliberation. You share this space with 3 others, though at present only 2 remain inside, still cocooned in their bedding. The third, you recall, drew the early watch and has not yet returned. The arrangement of bodies within the tent follows a geometry dictated by cold and practicality. You sleep with heads pointing inward, feet toward the canvas walls, close enough that the warmth of one man's body might contribute to the survival of the next. In the tent's center, a small circle of stones contains the remnants of last night's fire, though to call it a fire seems generous. A bed of embers, carefully banked beneath a layer of ash, releases almost no visible light, but offers a core of heat around which the small society of the tent organizes itself. The smoke from this modest blaze finds its way through a vent at the tent's peak, a carefully constructed opening that can be widened or narrowed by adjusting an external flap, a constant negotiation between the need for warmth and the danger of suffocation. Outside, you hear the particular crunch of footsteps approaching, the compression of old snow that has been walked over so many times it has transformed into something between ice and gravel. The tent flap pulls aside and Robert enters, stooping beneath the low entrance, bringing with him a gust of exterior cold that seems to devour the accumulated warmth of the night. His face has the raw quality of exposed skin in winter, red along the cheeks and nose, and small crystals of ice cling to his beard where his breath has frozen against the hair. He carries wood under one arm, precious fuel gathered during his watch, and he sets it down near the fire with the careful attention of someone handling gold. The wind's shifted, he says, his voice rough from cold and disuse. Coming from the north now. We'll want to check the stakes on that side. You nod, understanding the implication. A northern wind in this place brings not just cold, but a particular quality of cold, one that seems to carry intention, as if the air itself has traveled across vast distances of ice and snow specifically to find you here. The tent's northern face will bear the brunt of it, and stakes that were secure yesterday may work loose as the canvas strains and pulls, the ropes creaking with tension. The man to your left stirs now, drawn to waking by the sound of voices. This is William, younger than most, perhaps 20 summers behind him, though the campaign has aged him in ways that have nothing to do with years. His face emerges from the furs slowly, reluctant, and his eyes find the tent's roof before they find anything else, as if he needs to confirm the shelter still holds before acknowledging the day. You have watched this ritual of his for weeks now, this moment of reorientation, and you recognize in it something of your own first campaign, when each morning brought a small surprise that you had survived another night. The fire's nearly out, William observes, stating the obvious in the way of someone still finding his voice in the morning cold. I'll rebuild it, Robert replies, already moving to coax the embers back to life. From a pouch at his belt he produces a small bundle of dry tinder, material kept carefully preserved against the damp, and begins to feed it to the coals with patient precision. You watch his hands work, noting the practiced economy of motion, the way he positions each piece to maximize airflow while minimizing waste. Fire in this place is not the roaring comfort of a hearth, but rather a careful calculation, a measured expenditure of resources against the constant debt of cold. The fourth member of your tent society, Michel, sleeps on or perhaps feigns sleep, his body motionless beneath blankets that have seen better years. He is older than the rest of you, approaching perhaps his 40th year, and carries with him the weary knowledge of someone who has campaigned in too many winters. His snoring has stopped, which usually means he is awake, but he does not emerge, and no one disturbs him. There is an unspoken understanding that each man is entitled to his own pace in facing the day, that the morning's small mercies include the right to delay full consciousness for as long as circumstances allow. You reach for your boots, which you have kept inside the tent, tucked beneath the edge of your sleeping furs. This is a lesson learned painfully by those who leave them outside. Leather freezes in the night, becomes rigid as wood, and the process of warming it enough to where it can consume half the morning. The boots slide on with difficulty nonetheless, the leather stiff and cold despite your precautions, and you work your feet into them with patience, feeling the material resist and then reluctantly accommodate. Wool stockings, somewhat damp from yesterday's march, provide a thin barrier between flesh and leather, and you wiggle your toes experimentally, confirming that sensation remains, that the night has not stolen anything permanent. Robert has succeeded in waking the fire to something approaching life. Small flames now dance among the new wood, yellow and orange brightness that seems almost shocking in the tent's gray dimness. The temperature shift is perceptible but modest, a zone of relative warmth extending perhaps 2 feet from the flames, and the four of you unconsciously adjust your positions to maximize benefit, a subtle choreography of cold-habituated bodies. The smoke thickens momentarily before finding its way to the vent, and you taste it on your tongue, that familiar amalgam of burning pine and dampness, seasoned with the faint resinous character of wood cut from high altitudes. "They'll want us to move again today," Michel says suddenly, speaking from within his cocoon of blankets without preamble. His voice carries the flat certainty of experience. "You've heard something?" you ask. "I've heard nothing," he replies. "Which is how I know. When they mean for us to rest, the officers tell us. When they want us to march, they say nothing until it's time to break camp. The logic is difficult to refute, and you consider it while pulling on additional layers. The padded tunic that goes over your undershirt, the leather jerkin that provides some protection against both weather and weapons. Each garment represents a small battle won against the cold, but each also adds weight, restricts movement, creates friction against other layers. You are building yourself into a more durable version of yourself, less flexible, more insulated, a compromise between comfort and survival that never feels entirely satisfactory. William has begun to dress as well, his movements slower, marked by small winces that speak of aches and pains accumulated over weeks of hard travel. You have noticed him favoring his left side the past few days, though he has said nothing and you have not asked. There is a code here, an understanding that a man is expected to bear his discomforts privately unless they threaten his ability to function. To complain is to risk being left behind, and to be left behind in country like this is to accept a death sentence delivered by degrees of cold. The tent's interior has become almost comfortable now with the fire rebuilt and 4 bodies adding their heat to the enclosed space. You can see each other's faces more clearly in the firelight, the details that the dawn's diffuse glow left obscure. Robert's nose shows the white patches of frostbite starting to take hold at the tip, and you make a mental note to mention it to him when the moment seems right. Michelle's eyes carry deep shadows beneath them, the kind that speak of inadequate sleep compounding over many nights, and William's lips are cracked and bleeding in small places despite the animal fat you have all been rationing for such purposes. Outside, the camp continues its morning transformation from sleeping to waking entity. You hear the clang of metal on metal as someone strikes a frozen water barrel, attempting to break through the ice that has formed overnight. Voices call back and forth, the words indistinct but the tones familiar, questions, acknowledgments, the occasional laugh quickly cut short. There is a particular quality to sound in extreme cold, a crispness and clarity that allows voices to carry across vast distances while simultaneously seeming to drain them of warmth, rendering even friendly exchanges somehow austere. "We should eat," Robert suggests, and though no one shows enthusiasm, everyone agrees. He produces from his pack the day's rations, distributed yesterday evening by the quartermaster. Hard bread that requires soaking before it can be safely chewed, dried meat of uncertain provenance, and a small portion of cheese that has frozen solid and must be shaved into edible fragments. This is the diet that has sustained the army for weeks, monotonous and barely adequate, supplemented occasionally by whatever game can be hunted or purchased from the few settlements brave or desperate enough to trade with a foreign army. The bread goes into a small pot of melted snow that sits at the fire's edge, and you watch it begin to soften, the water taking on a cloudy character as the bread's substance bleeds into it. This gruel, if it can be called that, will constitute the morning meal, divided 4 ways, supplemented by the stringy dried meat which you will chew methodically while the bread soaks. There is no ceremony to eating here, no grace said, no particular gratitude expressed. The act is mechanical, functional, a necessary maintenance of the body's ability to generate heat and perform labor. Michel finally emerges from his blankets, moving with the stiffness of cold-locked joints, and joins the circle around the fire. His breath comes with a wheeze that concerns you though you say nothing. How many times have you watched men sicken in winter campaigns, their bodies worn down by cold and damp until the smallest ailment finds purchase and expands to something lethal? The cough that begins as a minor irritation becomes the deep rattle of lung fever, and then one morning the man does not wake, or wakes only to die before noon, his body having exhausted its capacity to fight on multiple fronts. The wind, Michel says, tilting his head toward the tent's wall where the canvas ripples and pops under the gusts. It's worse than yesterday. You all listen for a moment, attending to the sound with the focus of men whose lives depend on reading such signs. The wind does seem to have strengthened, and its voice has changed character. No longer the steady push of yesterday, but something more turbulent, marked by sudden intensifications and lulls. This kind of wind makes tent life precarious, can strip away shelters that seem secure, can blind men with driven snow if a storm accompanies it. We'll need to reinforce everything, you say, and the others nod, understanding that this will be the morning's first labor, before any official duties are assigned, before the officers emerge from their own larger and better appointed tents to organize the day's march or work. The bread has softened enough to eat, and Robert portions it out with care, using a wooden spoon worn smooth from long use. The distribution is scrupulously equal, each man receiving his due, no favoritism, no miscalculation. You have learned that in circumstances like these, fairness is not merely a virtue but a necessity, that the perception of unequal treatment can poison a tense society faster than cold or hunger. The gruel is warm if not hot, and it spreads through your chest and stomach with a comfort that seems disproportionate to its meager substance. Your body receives it gratefully, begins converting it immediately into the energy required for another day's survival. As you eat, conversation drifts toward the past, toward the journey that brought you here. It has been 60 days since the army left the last proper city, a place with walls and markets and the hum of ordinary life. 60 days of northward progress through increasingly inhospitable terrain, following a war that seems always to recede before you, like a horizon that maintains its distance no matter how far you travel toward it. The reason for the campaign has grown abstract in your mind, lost beneath the immediate concerns of cold and fatigue and the maintenance of basic function. There was an enemy once, you recall, a force to be engaged and defeated, but you have not seen them in weeks, and their absence has become more oppressive than their presence might have been, because it denies purpose to the suffering, makes the cold and the hardship seem arbitrary rather than necessary. Do you remember that village? William asks, addressing no one in particular. The one with the covered well? You remember. A cluster of buildings huddled in a valley, 3 weeks past, where the inhabitants had not fled at the army's approach, but had instead offered cautious trade. The well there had been protected by a small wooden roof, which had kept the water from freezing solid, and the quartermaster had paid in silver for the privilege of drawing from it. You had filled every container you possessed with that water, knowing even then that it might be the last fresh water you would encounter for some time. The prediction had proven accurate. The girl who minded the well, Robert adds, his voice taking on a distant quality. She had red hair. I remember thinking how strange it looked against all that snow. Like fire. None of you respond to this observation, but you all understand it. The small, unexpected beauties that punctuate campaigns like this take on outsized significance, become memories that you turn over in your mind during the hardest hours. A girl with red hair. A covered well. The taste of bread that had not yet turned stale. These are the things that sustain you when the larger purposes fail to compel. Michel coughs again, a deep rattling sound that he tries to suppress, but cannot entirely contain. When it passes, he spits into the fire, and you see the phlegm sizzle in the flames, tinged with something darker than it should be. Robert catches your eye, and in his expression you read your own concern reflected back. Michel sees the exchange and waves it away with one hand, a dismissive gesture that is meant to forestall discussion. I'm fine, he says, though no one has suggested otherwise. It's just the cold. You should see the physician, William offers, but Michel shakes his head. The physician, he says with evident disdain. has a tent full of men with frostbite and flux. He doesn't need my cough added to his troubles. Besides, what would he do? Tell me to stay warm and rest. He laughs, a sound without humor. If rest and warmth were available, I wouldn't need a physician. The logic is unassailable, and you let the matter drop, though you make a private resolution to watch Michel closely in the coming days. You have marched beside this man through 2 campaigns now, have shared bread and danger, and have come to value his steady presence, his experience, his ability to find dark humor in circumstances that would break younger men. The thought of losing him to something as mundane as a winter cough seems unbearable, though you know that more men die of illness in winter campaigns than of enemy action, that the cold kills more efficiently than any blade. The morning's meal concluded, you begin the process of preparing for the day. Blankets and furs must be rolled and secured. The fire must be carefully extinguished in a way that preserves as much unburned wood as possible. Personal items must be packed into the canvas sacks that serve as luggage and pillow and, occasionally, as improvised weapons when filled with stones. The tent itself will remain standing for now, at least until official word comes regarding the day's movements. But everything must be ready for rapid breakdown should the order come. You step outside into the full force of the morning, and the cold hits you with renewed intensity, finding every gap in your clothing, every place where fabric has worn thin. The sun has not yet cleared the mountains to the east, and the camp exists in a blue half-light that drains color from everything, rendering the world in shades of white and gray. The ground beneath your feet is iron-hard, and patches of ice glint dully where men have spilled water or relieved themselves, and the liquid has frozen instantly into treacherous footing. The camp stretches in all directions, a temporary city of canvas and smoke, organized in rough rows and blocks according to company and cohort. Hundreds of tents identical, or nearly so to your own, create a geometric pattern across the shallow valley, their peaked roofs sagging under frost, their guy ropes taut with ice. Smoke rises from the center of each habitation, thin columns that the wind tears apart almost as soon as they clear the tent vents, and the cumulative effect is a low haze that hangs over the entire encampment, smelling of wood smoke and human habitation, adding another layer of obscurity to the morning's dim light. You begin the inspection of your tent's perimeter, following the guy ropes from the tent's corners to their anchor points, checking each for tension and security. Robert works the opposite side, performing the same assessment, while William attends to the woodpile and Michel, despite his cough, begins clearing snow from the area immediately around the entrance. These tasks require no discussion or coordination. They have become ritual, the automatic behaviors of men who have lived in each other's proximity long enough to function as a single organism. The northern stakes, as Robert predicted, have loosened slightly during the night, worked free by the wind's constant pressure against that side of the tent. You extract the iron spike from its hole and search for new placement, a spot where the ground might accept the stake more deeply. The earth resists, and you must strike the stake's head repeatedly with a stone, each impact traveling up through your arm and shoulder, before it finally seats properly. The rope, when you test it, shows good tension now, and you move to the next anchor point, repeating the process. Around you, other men perform similar maintenance, emerging from their tents in 2s and 3s to address the small failures that each night inflicts on the camp. You exchange nods with neighbors whose names you may or may not know, fellow sufferers in this landscape of cold, bound by shared circumstance if not by friendship. A man from the adjacent tent offers a brief report that his section lost a tent entirely during the night, the poles snapping under a gust, collapsing onto the sleeping men inside. No one was killed, he says, but 2 suffered injuries from the pole's sharp ends, and the tent itself is a total loss, the canvas torn beyond field repair. This news circulates quickly, carried from group to group, and you can see its effect on morale, the way men's faces tighten with the knowledge that the margin between shelter and exposure is so thin. The men from the collapsed tent will have to double up with others, creating overcrowding that will make every tent colder and less comfortable, and the distribution of this burden will undoubtedly create friction. You resolve silently that if the lot falls to your tent to take in refugees, you will do so without complaint, though you dread the loss of space, the additional strain on limited resources. The morning progresses toward what might be called full daylight, though the overcast sky admits only a grudging illumination, turning the world from blue-black to gray-white without providing anything that could be mistaken for brightness. The wind continues its assault, and you feel your exposed skin growing numb. the cold penetrating through layers of wool and leather to find the warmth of your core. Your fingers, despite gloves, have begun to lose sensation, and you flex them repeatedly, making fists and releasing them, forcing blood to the extremities. A horn sounds from the direction of the command tents, 3 long blasts that carry clearly through the cold air, and immediately the camp's activity intensifies. The signal means assembly, which likely means marching orders, which confirms Michelle's prediction. You return to your tent to find the others already beginning breakdown, pulling stakes, loosening ropes, preparing to transform your small shelter back into a portable bundle. The work proceeds with practiced efficiency, each man knowing his role, and within minutes the tent has collapsed into its component parts. Poles, canvas, ropes, and stakes, all of which must be distributed among the 4 of you to carry. The weight is substantial but not unbearable, distributed according to a calculus that accounts for each man's strength and existing burden. You take your share of the canvas, folding it carefully to preserve its waterproofing, and secure it to your pack with leather straps. The poles go to Robert and William, the ropes and stakes to Michelle, and within a quarter hour of the horn's call, your tent has ceased to exist as structure and returned to being cargo, one small component of an army's portable existence. You join the forming lines, taking your place in the column according to company and rank, surrounded by men in similar states of preparation, all burdened with packs and weapons, all wearing the same expression of resigned endurance. The officers move among you, performing count and inspection, ensuring that no one has been lost to the night, that equipment is properly maintained, that the army remains cohesive despite the cold's constant attempts at dissolution. The order to march comes without ceremony or explanation. The column simply begins moving, one man following another, feet finding the rhythm that will carry you through another day's journey into the frozen north. You do not know your destination, though rumors circulate and whispers pass down the line. A fortress ahead, a valley where the enemy waits, a city rich with plunder. These stories are almost certainly false, invented by boredom and hope, but they provide something to occupy the mind during the long hours of walking, and so they are treasured despite their implausibility. The landscape through which you march offers little variety, endless rolling hills of snow broken by occasional stands of pine, their branches heavy with ice. The sky remains low and threatening, pregnant with storms that may or may not arrive, and the wind never relents, pushing against you when the trail turns north, pulling at your clothing when it shifts east or west. The cold is a constant presence, no longer shocking but instead a baseline condition, the foundation upon which all other sensations build. You walk in silence mostly, conserving energy and breath, focused on the simple mechanics of placing one foot before the other, maintaining position in the column, not falling behind. Around you, others do the same, and the army becomes a kind of organism, a many-legged creature crawling across the frozen landscape, driven by purposes that individual soldiers cannot fully comprehend, sustained by logistics they can only dimly perceive. Hours pass, marked by nothing except the gradual shift of light and the accumulation of fatigue in your legs and back. The pack's weight, tolerable at first, becomes oppressive, the straps digging into your shoulders, creating points of pain that pulse with each step. You shift the burden repeatedly, seeking relief that never quite materializes, and you watch other men perform the same futile adjustments, the same small negotiations with discomfort. A rest is called at what you judge to be midday, though the sun remains hidden behind clouds, and the time could as easily be morning or afternoon. The column halts and men collapse where they stand, grateful for even a brief respite. You lower yourself to the ground carefully, your cold-stiffened muscles protesting, and you work your way out of the pack's straps with relief that feels almost spiritual. Around you, men produce rations and begin the joyless process of eating food too cold to taste, drinking water that has partially frozen despite being carried close to body heat. Michel sits heavily beside you, his breathing labored, his face carrying an unhealthy flush despite the cold. You offer him water from your skin, and he accepts it with a nod, drinking deeply before handing it back. The cough that has plagued him all morning returns now, violent and prolonged, and when it finally releases him, he remains bent forward, hands on knees, struggling to recover his breath. You need to fall out, you tell him, keeping your voice low so only he can hear. Go to the physician's wagon. He shakes his head stubbornly. And be left behind. I'll march. You'll march yourself into the ground. You counter, but you know even as you speak that the argument is pointless. Michel will continue until he cannot, driven by pride or fear or simple determination, and nothing you say will alter this trajectory. The rest period ends too soon, the horn calling you back to your feet, back into the harness of your pack, back onto the trail that leads ever northward into deeper cold. You rise with effort, feeling every mile of the morning's march registered in your joints and muscles, and you help Michel to his feet, noting the way he leans on you more than he should, the way his weight carries a quality of dependence. The afternoon's march proves harder than the morning's, fatigue compounding with cold to create a state approaching numbness, where the world narrows to the small circle of ground immediately before your feet and the rhythmic placement of your steps. You lose track of time, of distance, of purpose, and exist only as motion, as forward progress, as the determination to remain upright and moving. When the column finally halts for the day, stopping in another shallow valley that looks identical to the one you left that morning, relief washes over you with such intensity that you feel almost dizzy. The order comes to establish camp, and you and the others begin once again the process of transforming portable bundles back into shelter, staking out ground, raising poles, securing canvas against the wind that shows no sign of diminishing. The tent goes up more slowly than it came down, your cold-numbed fingers fumbling with knots, your exhausted body resisting the labor. But eventually it stands, a small declaration of continued survival, a fragile barrier between yourselves and the night's approach. You crawl inside gratefully, dragging your pack behind you, and collapse onto the ground that has not yet had time to warm, that still carries the iron hardness of frozen earth. Robert works at starting a fire while William unpacks the evening's rations, and Michel lies motionless against the tent's far wall, his breathing shallow and rapid. You watch him with growing concern, noting the way he shivers despite being wrapped in every covering available, the way his eyes remain closed even as activity continues around him. "Michel," you say, and when he does not respond, you crawl closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. His body radiates heat through the layers of clothing, a fever heat that seems to contradict the cold, but which you recognize as a dangerous sign. His eyes open slowly, unfocused. "I'm just tired," he murmurs. "Just need to rest." You exchange glances with Robert and William, and in their faces you see your own fear reflected. Michel's condition has deteriorated faster than any of you anticipated, crossing in the span of a single day's march from concerning to critical, and you are faced now with decisions that seem to offer no good options. "I'll go to the physician's tent," William volunteers, already moving toward the entrance, but you catch his arm. "Wait until full camp is established," you tell him. "The physician will be overwhelmed right now, dealing with the day's injuries. We'll make Michel comfortable, and then you can go." It is a rationalization, a delay that you justify as practicality, but which is really a form of denial, a reluctance to acknowledge how serious the situation has become. You help Michel into a position halfway between sitting and lying, propped against a rolled pack, and you pile furs over him until only his face remains visible. He does not protest or assist, simply allows himself to be arranged like cargo, his passivity more frightening than any complaint would be. Robert has succeeded in coaxing flame from tinder, and the small fire begins to push back against the tent's cold, creating a zone of relative warmth that you all orient toward. The day's light fades quickly, the brief northern afternoon surrendering to evening, and outside the sounds of the camp settling into night routine filter through the canvas. Voices calling, axes biting wood, the constant wind that has become like silence, so persistent that you only notice it when it briefly pauses. You prepare the evening meal in near silence, the usual banter absent, replaced by a heavy awareness of Michel's condition and the uncertainty it introduces. The food, when distributed, seems even less appetizing than usual, but you force yourself to eat mechanically, knowing that your body requires fuel regardless of appetite or circumstances. Full darkness has descended by the time you finish eating, and William finally ventures out to seek the physician. You and Robert remain with Michel, maintaining the fire, adjusting his coverings, offering water that he accepts but barely drinks. His fever seems to have intensified, and he has begun to speak occasionally, fragments of sentences that make no sense, names and places from a past you do not share. Time stretches in the flickering firelight, each minute feeling elastic, distorted, and you find yourself listening to the sounds beyond the tent with unusual intensity, trying to distinguish William's returning footsteps from the general noise of the camp. When he finally does return, pushing through the entrance with cold air swirling around him, his expression tells you everything before he speaks. The physician says he cannot come, William reports, his voice flat. There are too many others, cases more urgent. He says to keep Michel warm, to give him water, and to bring him to the medical tent if he worsens significantly. How does he worsen beyond this? Robert demands, frustration breaking through his usual composure. William shrugs helplessly. Those were his words. You accept this news without further comment, understanding that anger accomplishes nothing, that the physician's resources are finite and must be rationed as carefully as food or firewood. Michel has become one calculation among many, and his value in that calculus has been assessed and found wanting. The knowledge is bitter but not surprising, and you turn your attention back to the practical matters of his care, the small comforts you can provide within the tent's limited means. The night deepens around you, and you take turns maintaining watch over both fire and patient, feeding wood to the flames in careful increments, adjusting Michel's position when he grows restless, wiping the sweat from his face with a cloth dampened in melted snow. His fever burns through the night, neither breaking nor worsening, holding him in some suspended state between crisis and recovery. And you can only wait, bearing witness to his struggle while the cold presses against the tent's walls and the wind sings its endless song of emptiness. Somewhere in the small hours, Michel's breathing changes, becoming deeper and more regular, and the lines of pain in his face seem to ease slightly. You allow yourself a small measure of hope, wondering if perhaps the fever has crested and will now recede, if his body's strength will prove sufficient to carry him through. Robert, noticing the same change, meets your eyes across the fire, and in his expression you see cautious optimism matching your own. The fire burns low again, and you add wood to it quietly, trying not to disturb William, who has finally allowed himself to sleep, curled on his side with his head pillowed on his pack. The tent's interior holds a precarious warmth, constantly threatened but never quite extinguished, and you huddle close to the flames, feeling the heat on your face and hands while your back remains aware of the greater cold lurking just beyond the canvas walls. You think about the path that has brought you here, the decisions and circumstances that have led to this moment of watching over a fevered companion in a frozen waste. The reasons seem less clear than they once did, the cause less compelling, but the bonds forged in hardship remain solid. And you find yourself hoping with surprising intensity that Michel will survive, that morning will bring improvement, that this small society of the tent will emerge intact from the night's trial. It is perhaps a small thing to hope for, measured against the larger movements of armies and nations, but in this moment, in this place, it seems like everything, the only thing, the single point of light around which meaning can organize itself. The night continues its slow revolution toward dawn, and you tend the fire, and you wait. You wake before dawn, though the word wake feels inadequate for the slow surfacing from half-sleep that has become your nightly rhythm. The darkness inside the tent remains absolute, thick as wool, and for a moment you lie perfectly still, listening to the breathing of the men around you, the subtle shifts of bodies seeking warmth that never quite arrives. Your hip aches where it has pressed against the frozen ground through layers of felt and straw, a dull persistent pain that you know will fade only when you move, only when you force blood back into the compressed flesh. But you do not move yet. You hold yourself in this threshold space, neither fully asleep nor fully awake, aware of the cold that has settled into your bones like a second skeleton, harder and more enduring than the first. Outside, beyond the canvas walls, you hear the sentries changing. Footsteps crunch across snow that has been packed to ice by countless passages, and voices murmur low, words indistinct but tone familiar. The brief exchange of men passing a burden from one set of shoulders to another. You have stood those watches yourself countless times, and you know the particular relief that comes when your replacement appears out of the darkness. Know the way warmth drains from your body during those long hours of stillness, how your fingers grow numb inside your mittens, how your face becomes a mask of cold that barely feels like your own skin anymore. Thomas stirs beside you, a long exhalation that might be waking or might be the deep sigh of troubled sleep. You cannot see him in this darkness, but you know he is there by the warmth his body contributes to the shared space, by the familiar sound of his breathing, by the simple fact of proximity that has become as certain as sunrise. In the months you have spent together in this encampment, pressing against winter that seems to have no end, you have learned to read the presences of your companions in darkness, to know them by sound and smell and the subtle disturbances they make in the still air. Beyond Thomas lies Edmund, and beyond Edmund, Peter the Younger, and beyond him the canvas wall where frost has gathered in delicate ferns of ice, beautiful and hostile. nature's decoration on the barrier between you and the night. 7 men share this tent, 7 bodies contributing warmth to the small atmosphere you maintain through nothing more than the heat of living flesh, the breath from living lungs, the stubborn persistence of life itself against a landscape that seems designed to extinguish it. You shift finally, rolling onto your back, feeling the protest of muscles that have held one position too long in the cold. The movement releases a pocket of warmth that your body had created against the ground, and frigid air rushes in to replace it. A small shock that helps complete your waking. Above you, invisible in the darkness, the tent's peak rises to its center pole, and you know without seeing that ice crystals have formed there too, condensation from breath frozen into tiny jewels that will melt into cold droplets when the brazier is lit, that will fall onto the blankets and faces of sleeping men like a parody of rain. You hear Willem moving near the entrance, recognizing him by the particular care he takes, the methodical nature of his movements. He is the one who rises first each morning, who takes upon himself the task of rekindling the fire in the brazier that has burned low through the night, coaxing flame back from embers that have barely survived the darkness. It is not an assigned duty, there is no roster for this particular task, but Willem has claimed it as his own, perhaps because it gives him purpose in these early hours when purpose can be hard to find, perhaps simply because he cannot sleep as soundly as the rest of you, his mind too active even in exhaustion. You listen as he works, hearing the soft scrape of the brazier's cover being lifted, the gentle sound of him adding tinder to whatever small life remains in the coals. He works by touch in this darkness, by knowledge of where things are kept, by the practiced familiarity of a task repeated so many times it has become instinct. You remember the first weeks of winter, when such tasks required light, when men would fumble and curse in the darkness, when everything took twice as long because fingers were clumsy with cold and unfamiliarity. But time has taught you all efficiency, has honed your movements into economy, has made you capable in conditions that once seemed impossible. A faint glow begins to grow near the tent's center, the first suggestion of light that transforms the absolute darkness into something softer, more navigable. Willem's face appears in the growing illumination, rendered in shades of amber and shadow, his breath visible now as pale clouds that drift and dissipate in the cold air. The light catches in his beard, showing the ice that has formed there from his breathing, tiny crystals that sparkle briefly before beginning to melt in the brazier's warmth. He looks up, catches your eye, and nods once. A simple acknowledgement of shared wakefulness, of the quiet companionship of men who have learned to live together in small spaces, who have learned when to speak, and when to simply recognize one another in silence. The growing light reveals the tent's interior in stages, each degree of brightness bringing new details into view. You see the bundles of belongings hung from the tent's frame, the bags and pouches suspended above the ground where dampness and vermin cannot reach them as easily, where they create a kind of secondary ceiling, a layer of fabric and leather that holds in warmth and muffles sound. You see the shapes of sleeping men, bundled in whatever they have to keep them warm, looking less like soldiers than like strange cocoons, like creatures in winter dormancy, waiting for a spring that may never come. Thomas rises to sitting, moving slowly, careful not to wake Edmund who sleeps on beside him. In the brazier's light, you see how thin Thomas has become, how the winter has carved him down to essentials, how his face has lost the softness it carried when you first marched north together in autumn. You all carry this thinness now, this reduction, though rations have not been scarce enough to call it true hunger. It is simply that the cold consumes you, that your bodies burn everything they can to maintain the warmth necessary for life, that flesh becomes fuel in the endless campaign against freezing. Another night, Thomas says quietly, his voice rough with sleep and cold. It is statement rather than question, observation rather than complaint, the kind of thing that gets said in these early moments not because it needs saying, but because speech itself is confirmation of survival, because words are proof that you have made it through once more, that you remain alive and conscious and capable of language. You nod, though you know the gesture is barely visible in the dim light, though words would serve better. But there is understanding between you that transcends the need for constant speech, that allows for these small gestures, these minimal communications that nevertheless convey everything necessary. Another night survived. Another morning arrived at. Another day to be endured until night comes again, and the cycle repeats. Peter the Younger wakes with a start, a sharp intake of breath, his body jerking as though he has been falling. You recognize the signs of a dream interrupted, of consciousness returning too quickly, bringing with it momentary disorientation. He was sleeping more soundly than the rest of you. You think, deeply enough for dreams to take hold, deeply enough that waking feels like violence. For a moment, he looks around the tent with wide eyes, as though he has forgotten where he is, as though he expected to wake somewhere else. Somewhere warmer, somewhere safer, somewhere that is not this canvas shelter on frozen ground in a winter that has stretched beyond all reasonable measure. Easy, Edmund murmurs, woken by Peter's movement, his voice still thick with sleep but gentle, the tone you might use with a startled horse. You're here. We're all here. The words seem to anchor Peter, and you see recognition return to his face, see him remember where he is and why, see him settle back into the reality of the tent and the cold and the morning that is coming whether any of you are ready for it or not. He nods, swallows, draws his blanket tighter around his shoulders, and you look away to give him the dignity of privacy in his moment of vulnerability. The tent flap stirs as someone outside moves past, and a breath of truly bitter air enters, making the brazier's flame dance and sending a ripple of cold through the space that reminds you all how fragile your warmth is, how thin the barrier between your small haven and the hostile world beyond. The cold that enters is different from the cold inside the tent. It is sharp and active, aggressive in a way that the settled cold of your shelter is not, and it carries with it the smell of snow and wood smoke and the particular mineral scent of frozen earth. Willem adds another piece of fuel to the brazier, a chunk of wood that he has kept dry for this purpose, stored in his own bedding to protect it from the moisture that pervades everything here. The wood is precious. Supplies are not unlimited, and every piece must be carefully rationed, must be weighed against the need for warmth and the necessity of making provisions last until resupply can come, until the weather clears enough for the wagons to make their way up from the supply depots in the valleys below. You have learned to appreciate fuel the way you once might have appreciated gold, have learned to understand fire as wealth, as currency, as the difference between endurance and surrender. As the wood catches, the light brightens further, and you can see everyone now with clarity. Jeffrey still sleeps, curled tight on himself, his face turned toward the tent wall, and you wonder what dreams he finds there in his stubborn unconsciousness, whether they are warm dreams, summer dreams, whether in sleep he escapes to places where cold is not the defining fact of existence. Robert is awake but quiet, sitting with his back against a supply bundle, his eyes distant, his hands folded in his lap, and you recognize the expression of a man saying prayers, giving thanks for another night survived, petitioning for protection through another day, sending his words upward through canvas and ice and the cold air to whatever heaven he believes waits beyond. You shift again, preparing to rise, and the movement reminds you of every ache you carry, every place where cold has settled into joints and muscle, every injury that winter has made chronic, every pain that has become so familiar you almost forget to notice it until movement brings it back to prominence. Your shoulder, where you took a blow during weapons training 3 weeks ago, sends a sharp complaint up into your neck. Your left foot, which you frostbit mildly in the first severe cold of early winter, tingles unpleasantly as feeling returns to it. Your lower back, strained from the endless labor of maintaining an encampment in hostile conditions, adds its own note to the chorus of discomfort that is your body waking to another day. But you rise anyway, because there is nothing to be gained from remaining prone, because movement is necessary, because the day requires your participation whether you feel capable of giving it or not. You stand carefully, mindful of the low ceiling, and begin the process of preparing yourself for the morning, for the cold, for whatever tasks the day will demand. The first task is always the same. You need to go outside, need to answer the body's requirements, need to step beyond the tent into the full force of the winter morning. You begin layering yourself for this venture, pulling on the outer garments you removed for sleeping, wrapping yourself in wool and leather, covering as much exposed skin as possible, preparing for the transition from the tent's relative warmth to the brutal cold that waits beyond the canvas walls. Thomas rises too, and together you move toward the tent's entrance, a wordless agreement to face the morning together, to provide whatever small companionship might make the shock of cold slightly less daunting. Willem nods as you pass, still tending the brazier, ensuring that warmth will be maintained in your absence, that this small refuge will remain viable. You loosen the tent flap's ties, and cold air pours in like water through a breached dam, eager and invasive, seeking every gap in your clothing, every exposed inch of skin. You step through quickly, Thomas following, and secure the flap behind you, sealing the warmth inside, stepping fully into the world beyond. The cold outside takes your breath, as it does every morning, as you suspect it will always do no matter how accustomed to it you become. It is a physical presence, a force that presses against you, that seeks entry through your mouth and nose, that makes your eyes water and your skin contract. The sky above is still dark, though dawn is coming. You can see the faintest suggestion of light along the eastern horizon, a promise that the sun still exists somewhere beyond this frozen darkness. That day will eventually come, though it may bring little warmth with it. The encampment spreads around you, a collection of tents arranged with military precision, paths cleared between them, trampled snow packed to ice by the passage of many feet. Fires burn in several places, tended by men whose watch duty includes this task, and smoke rises from braziers throughout the camp, thin gray columns that climb into the still air before dispersing into invisibility. The smoke carries the smell of burning wood, of the green pine that is all you can find in adequate quantity this far north, and the scent is sharp and resinous, not unpleasant despite the way it stings your eyes. Other men are moving about, dark shapes against the snow, going about their morning necessities, and you recognize several despite the darkness and the way cold weather gear obscures individual features. There is Hugh, unmistakable by his height and the particular care he takes with his movements, the legacy of a leg injury that never healed quite right. There is James of the Supply Corps, recognizable by the slight limp he carries from an old wound, making his rounds to check on the provision stores, to ensure that no tent has collapsed under snow weight, that no emergency has arisen in the night. There is Father Aldrich, the chaplain, moving between tents, beginning his morning rounds, offering quiet words of encouragement, hearing confessions, providing the spiritual sustenance that some men need as much as bread and water. You and Thomas make your way to the latrine area, a designated section at the camp's edge where pits have been dug and rough shelters erected to provide minimal privacy and protection from the wind. The snow around this area has been stained and disturbed, marked by the passage of many men with urgent needs, and you are reminded again of how winter renders even the most basic human functions difficult, how cold complicates everything, how nothing is simple or easy in these conditions. The act of relieving yourself in such cold is its own small misery. The exposure required, the vulnerability, the way the cold attacks immediately any flesh bared to it, the urgent desire to be done quickly warring with the body's reluctance to function normally in such hostile conditions. But you manage, as you have managed countless times before, and when you are finished you feel the small relief that comes from having accomplished even this basic task, from having met your body's needs despite the circumstances. Returning to the tent, you notice the sky has brightened fractionally, dawn advancing in its slow winter way, light seeping into the world rather than breaking over it, a gradual transformation from black to deep blue to the pale gray that passes for daylight in this season. The temperature, if anything, seems to have dropped. The coldest part of the day often comes just before dawn, as though night saves its most bitter gift for last, as though darkness wants to remind you of its power even as it prepares to retreat. Inside the tent, all the men are awake now, the small space filled with the quiet activity of soldiers preparing for the day. Geoffrey is sitting up, rubbing his face with hands that look red and raw even in the brazier's warm light. Robert has finished his prayers and is checking his equipment, running through the same inventory he performs every morning, ensuring that everything is where it should be, that nothing has been lost or damaged in the night. Edmund is braiding his hair, a task made difficult by the cold that stiffens his fingers, that makes the fine motor control required for such work frustratingly elusive. Peter the Younger is eating something from his personal provisions, chewing slowly on what looks like dried meat, and the sight reminds you that you too should eat, that the morning meal, such as it is, should be taken before duty calls you to other tasks. You retrieve your own provisions from where you keep them, wrapped carefully to protect against moisture and vermin, and you eat without much pleasure, but with the methodical determination of a man who understands that food is fuel, that eating is necessary for survival regardless of appetite or enjoyment. The bread you eat is hard, almost petrified by cold, and you have to soften it in your mouth before you can chew it, letting saliva do the work that warmth and freshness would do if this were a different season, a different place. The cheese is slightly better, though its flavor has been muted by freezing and refreezing, though its texture has become crumbly and strange. Still, it is food, and you are grateful for it, grateful that supply lines have held despite the weather, grateful that someone in authority has made ensuring your sustenance a priority. As you eat, you listen to the sounds of the camp coming fully to life around you, the sounds carrying through the canvas walls with surprising clarity. You hear voices calling orders, hear the ring of metal on metal as someone works at repairs on a piece of equipment, hear the crunch of footsteps multiplying as more men emerge from tents to begin their day. You hear horses nickering from the lines where they are kept, the animals probably cold and hungry, probably restless after a night of enforced stillness. You hear wood being chopped somewhere, an axe biting into frozen timber, the crack of splitting logs followed by the thud of pieces falling onto packed snow. Willem speaks, breaking the tent's internal quiet. "There's to be weapons drill this morning," he says, and his tone suggests this is not welcome news, though none of you expected otherwise. "Gerard told me last night. The captain wants all companies on the field at full light." Edmund groans softly, not in protest exactly, but in acknowledgement of the discomfort this means, the exertion that will be required, the exposure to cold that weapons drill entails. Training in winter is harder than training in any other season. Not because the movements are different, but because the cold makes everything more difficult, makes muscles reluctant, makes coordination suffer, makes even simple actions require twice the effort they would normally demand. "How long?" Thomas asks, practical as always, wanting to know the scope of what faces him. Willem shrugs. He didn't say. 2 hours, perhaps. Maybe less if the cold is too severe. You nod, filing this information away, adjusting your mental map of the day to accommodate this requirement. 2 hours of drill means 2 hours of movement, which means you will need to ensure you are properly layered, properly prepared, need to find the balance between enough clothing to prevent freezing and not so much that you cannot move effectively, that you do not sweat and become dangerously damp inside your garments. The conversation turns to other things, to small matters and minor complaints, to the kinds of talk that fill time and create the sense of normalcy that men need even in abnormal circumstances. Jeffrey mentions that his tent mate snores, says it with humor rather than genuine complaint, and others laugh, glad for the moment of levity. Robert wonders aloud whether the supply wagons will make it through this week, whether the weather will clear enough to allow passage, and Willem points out that the chaplain seemed optimistic yesterday, that Father Aldrich had heard from a messenger that conditions were improving in the lower elevations. You participate in this conversation only minimally, adding a word here and there but mostly listening, content to let the voices wash over you, to be present in the community of the tent without needing to dominate it. You have learned that there is value in quiet presence, that not every moment requires speech, that sometimes simply being there, being alive and awake and part of the shared experience, is contribution enough. The light continues to grow outside, and eventually the tent flap opens from without, someone loosening the ties and calling inside. Formation in 20 minutes. Full kit. Pass the word. The voice belongs to Gerard, one of the sergeants, and his words carry the weight of command, the expectation of compliance. You hear him moving on to the next tent, repeating his message, and you hear the message being repeated further away as other men take up the task of ensuring everyone is informed. 20 minutes. Enough time to finish eating, to make final preparations, to ensure that everything you need is with you, properly secured, properly maintained. You move into the practiced routine of preparation, checking your weapon, a spear that has been your companion through this entire campaign, its shaft worn smooth by your grip, its blade carefully maintained despite the difficulty of keeping metal clean and oiled in such conditions. You check your armor, such as it is, a leather jerkin reinforced with metal plates, adequate protection for a foot soldier of your station, not the gleaming plate of knights or the fine mail of wealthy men-at-arms, but serviceable, reliable yours. Around you, the other men are doing the same, each following his own pattern of preparation, each ensuring that he is ready for whatever the day demands. The tent fills with the sounds of this activity, the clink of buckles being fastened, the rustle of fabric being adjusted, the soft pad of feet on the tent's floor as men move in the limited space, working around one another with the practiced efficiency of those who have learned to share close quarters. Thomas stands beside you, and together you help each other with those tasks that are easier with assistance. Checking that armor sits properly, that straps are secure but not too tight, that nothing will chafe or bind or fail at an inopportune moment. This mutual aid has become ritual, another of the small ceremonies that structure your days, that give shape to time that might otherwise feel shapeless, that create connection in circumstances designed to isolate. Ready? Thomas asks when you are both equipped, when all preparations are complete. Ready, you confirm, though the word feels like an overstatement, though you doubt you will ever truly feel ready for anything in this place, in these conditions. Together with the others, you step out into the full morning, joining the flow of men moving toward the assembly area, becoming part of the larger body of the company, the regiment, the army that occupies this frozen place. The cold receives you without ceremony, wraps around you with the casual cruelty of a force that neither knows nor cares about your discomfort. That simply is what it is, implacable and indifferent. The assembly field is a large area of trampled snow, cleared and maintained for exactly this purpose, surrounded by the encampment on 3 sides and open to the northern wilderness on the 4th. Men are gathering in formation, organizing themselves by company and squad, falling into the patterns drilled into them through long repetition. You find your place in the line, Thomas to your right, Edmund to your left, and you stand at attention as you have been trained to stand, spear grounded beside you, eyes forward, waiting for orders. The cold settles over the assembled men like a visible weight, and you see your own discomfort reflected in every face, see the red noses and watering eyes, see the way men shift from foot to foot seeking any relief from the cold rising through boot soles from the frozen ground. See breath rising from hundreds of mouths in pale clouds that merge and rise and dissipate into the gray morning air. The captain arrives, accompanied by his lieutenants, and he surveys the assembled men with an expression that gives nothing away. He is a hard man, you have learned, but not cruel, demanding but not unreasonable. The kind of commander who asks nothing of his men that he would not do himself. You have seen him stand watch in the worst weather, have seen him labor alongside common soldiers at tasks that other officers might consider beneath them. And this has earned him a respect that mere rank could never command. Men, he begins, his voice carrying across the field with practiced clarity. You know why we are here. You know what is asked of you. Today we train, as we have trained before, as we will train again tomorrow and every day until spring comes, or until we are released from this duty. He pauses, letting his words settle, and you hear in them both the acknowledgement of hardship and the expectation that you will endure regardless. There is something almost comforting in this clarity, in the absence of false encouragement, in the recognition that what you face is difficult, and that difficulty will not be dismissed or minimized. We are soldiers, the captain continues, and soldiers train. We train because we must be ready, because we serve a purpose larger than our comfort, because when we are called upon to act, we must be capable. The cold makes this harder. I know this, but the cold does not excuse us from duty. If anything, it makes that duty more important, because only the disciplined survive conditions like these. Only the prepared endure. The speech is not long. The captain is not a man for lengthy oratory, especially not in weather that makes prolonged exposure dangerous. But it serves its purpose, reminding you all of your role, your duty, your place in the larger structure of command and necessity. When he finishes, the lieutenants take over, beginning to organize the men into drill groups, assigning specific exercises and rotations. You spend the next hour moving through weapons drills, practicing strikes and blocks and formations, working individually and in groups, repeating movements until they become automatic even through the cold-induced clumsiness of your body. The spear in your hands grows familiar all over again, its weight and balance asserting themselves in your muscle memory, and you fall into the rhythm of training, letting the physical demands override the discomfort, letting exertion generate the warmth that standing still could never provide. Sweat begins to gather beneath your layers despite the cold, and you feel the dangerous dampness beginning. Know that you will need to manage this carefully, will need to cool down slowly when the drill ends, will need to change into dry undergarments as soon as possible to prevent the sweat from freezing against your skin. But for now, while moving, the warmth is welcome, is almost pleasant, and you drive yourself harder, grateful for the opportunity to feel something other than cold, even if that warmth is temporary, even if it will make the cold worse later. Beside you, Thomas moves through the same drills, his breath coming harder, his movements showing the same slight stiffness that you feel in your own body. All around you, men are working, grunting with effort, calling out counts and commands, and the field fills with the sounds of training, the controlled violence of practice combat, the discipline of soldiers maintaining readiness. The morning advances, the sun rising to its low winter angle, providing light but little warmth, and the drill continues, relentless in its repetition, demanding in its standards. You feel time passing in your muscles, in your lungs, in the gradual accumulation of fatigue that makes each movement slightly harder than the last. But you do not stop, do not slow, because stopping would mean disappointing yourself, disappointing your companions, failing to meet the standard that has been set. Finally, the call comes to halt, to stand down, to return to your companies for dismissal. You stand in formation once more, breathing hard, steam rising from your body where sweat has reached the surface, and you listen as the captain gives his final words, his dismissal, his reminder that lunch will be distributed in 2 hours, that afternoon duties will be posted, that you should all take care of yourselves and one another. Released, you walk back toward the tent with Thomas and Edmund and Peter, your body singing with the exertion, your mind clearer than it was before, the drill having burned away some of the fog that cold and monotony create. There is satisfaction in having completed the training, in having met its demands, in having proven once again that you are capable, that you endure. Back at the tent, you strip off the outer layers that have become damp with sweat, and you change quickly into dry undergarments, feeling the relief of removing wet fabric from your skin, feeling the way dry wool feels almost warm by comparison. The tent's interior has been maintained in your absence. Someone must have returned early to tend the brazier, and the space retains enough warmth to make changing possible without immediate danger of freezing. You hang the damp garments to dry, arranging them near the brazier but not so close that they might scorch, and you know it will take hours for them to become truly dry again, that the dampness will be stubborn in this cold, reluctant to evaporate without real warmth to encourage it. But they will dry eventually, because they must, because you will need them again, because everything in this place must serve multiple times, must last, must endure just as you endure. The hours between drill and lunch pass in quiet rest, in small conversations and minor tasks, in the kind of time that has no particular shape or significance, but that makes up the bulk of life in the encampment. You lie on your bedding, not sleeping but not quite awake either, in that suspended state that you have learned to find, that allows rest without requiring the vulnerability of true sleep. When lunch comes, it is distributed from the cook fires, and you join the line of men waiting with bowls and cups, shuffling forward in the cold, patient because there is no benefit in impatience, because the food will come when it comes and hurrying will not make it arrive sooner. The meal is stew, thin but hot, with pieces of meat and root vegetables that have been preserved through various methods to last the winter. The broth is flavored with herbs and salt, and though it is not elaborated, is warming, and you are grateful for it, drinking it slowly, feeling the heat spread through your chest and belly, feeling life reassert itself in the warmth. You eat standing with Thomas and several others from your tent, forming a small cluster, protecting one another from the wind that has begun to rise, sharing the communal experience of the meal. The talk is minimal, mostly focused on the food itself, on appreciation for its warmth, on speculation about what cut of meat might be floating in the stew, on shared acknowledgement that the cooks do good work under difficult circumstances. When the meal is finished, you return your bowl to be washed, and you learn from the duty roster that you have the afternoon for personal time, that no specific labor is required of you until evening watch begins. This gift of unscheduled time feels almost luxurious, and you return to the tent with a sense of something like relief, glad to have hours ahead that are yours to use as you see fit. Inside the tent, you find Willem writing a letter, his materials spread carefully on a flat board across his knees, his expression focused as he forms words with cold, stiffened fingers. You have seen him write before, know that he corresponds regularly with family in the South, that maintaining this connection across distance and difficulty is important to him. You respect his concentration, moving quietly so as not to disturb him, settling onto your own bedding to determine how you will spend these hours. The afternoon light that filters through the canvas is pale and thin, barely adequate for detailed work, but sufficient for simple tasks. You decide to tend to your equipment, to do the small maintenance that keeps things functional, that prevents larger problems from developing. You take out your spear and begin cleaning it carefully, checking the blade for any sign of rust or damage, examining the bindings that secure the blade to the shaft, testing the wood itself for any weakness or crack that might presage failure. The work is meditative, requiring attention but not deep thought, and your hands move through familiar motions while your mind drifts, touching on memories and observations, on the past and the future, on the life you lived before this winter, and the life you hope to return to when it ends. You think of home, of people and places that exist in warmth, in a world where cold is temporary and conquerable, where spring always comes and winter always ends. You wonder if they think of you, if your absence is noticed, if prayers are said for your safety and return. Around you, other men pursue their own activities. Geoffrey is mending a tear in one of his blankets. Robert is reading from a small prayer book he carries, Edmund is simply resting with eyes closed, perhaps sleeping, perhaps just seeking the darkness behind his eyelids as escape from the monotony of gray canvas walls. The tent exists in quiet industry, each man occupied in his own way, all of you together in this small space that has become a kind of home despite its inadequacy, despite its inability to truly protect you from the cold that surrounds and penetrates everything. Evening comes early in winter, the sun setting long before it feels like day should end, and with evening comes the duties that structure the night. You learn that you have second watch, the hours between midnight and dawn, which means you should sleep now, in the early evening, to be rested enough to stand alert through those cold dark hours when the body most wants to surrender to sleep, when vigilance is hardest to maintain. You prepare for sleep as you have learned to do, layering yourself carefully, positioning yourself in the spot that has become yours through habit and arrangement, settling into your bedding with the resignation of one who knows that rest will not be truly restful, that sleep will not be truly restorative, but that it must be attempted regardless because the alternative is exhaustion that could prove dangerous. The sounds of the tent surround you as you close your eyes, breathing and shifting, the crackle of the brazier, the whisper of wind against canvas, the distant sounds of the encampment continuing its routines. You let these sounds become your lullaby, let them carry you toward whatever sleep you can find, and you surrender yourself to the strange half-rest that has become your nightly portion, knowing that in a few hours you will wake to stand your watch, to face the cold again, to endure because endurance is what is required, because survival demands nothing less than your constant vigilance, your stubborn refusal to yield to forces that would freeze the life from your body if given the opportunity. The cold waits, the night waits, and you, having learned patience from necessity, wait with them. You wake before dawn. Though in this darkness, waking feels less like surfacing from sleep than shifting from one state of cold consciousness to another. The inside of the tent holds a quality of stillness that tells you the wind has finally died, replaced by something worse, absolute, breathless cold. The kind that settles into the world when the sky clears and all the heat drains upward into empty space, as if the earth itself is exhaling its last warmth into the void. Your breath no longer mists visibly in the darkness. It's too cold even for that. The moisture freezes before it can condense, creating instead a faint crackling sensation at the back of your throat, a rime of ice forming in your nostrils with each inhalation. You've been cold for weeks now, cold in ways you never imagined possible back in the southern provinces. But this is different. This cold is weight. It presses down on your chest, making each breath something you must choose, must will into being. Around you, the tent holds the sounds of other men breathing, shallow, careful breaths that speak of ribs wrapped tight with wool, of bodies curled into the smallest possible shapes, of sleep that never quite arrives but only circles at a distance. Someone to your left, you think it might be Hugh, makes a sound halfway between a sigh and a shiver, a small exhalation of endurance. The sound comforts you more than it should. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. You shift slightly, feeling the layers of your body. The linen shirt against your skin, stiff now with dried sweat and the oils of unwashing. The wool tunic over that, its fibers packed tight from weeks of wear. The leather jerkin with its careful stitching. And finally the cloak, wrapped around you like a shell, like a second skin you've grown to contain this experience. Between your body and the ground lie the sheepskins, the straw, the folded canvas. All the small barriers you and your companions have built against the earth's cold hunger. They are not enough. They are never enough. But they are what you have, and so they become sufficient because they must. Outside, you hear the first sounds of the camp stirring. Not voices yet, but the small noises of men moving in cold. The crunch of frost-hardened snow under boots, the creak of frozen leather, the sharp crack of ice breaking as someone works water from the covered barrels. The fire watch is ending. Soon Peter will come to wake the next rotation. Though you are already awake, have perhaps been awake for hours in that strange state where consciousness and dreams blur together like breath and mist. The memory comes to you then, as memories do in these hours before dawn when the mind loosens its grip on the present. Your first night in the ice lands, months ago now, when you still believed you understood what cold meant. You had known winter in the valleys, had felt frost on autumn mornings, had even seen snow fall thick enough to cover the fields in silent white. You thought you were prepared. You remember the confidence with which you had laid out your bedroll that first evening, the casual way you had wrapped yourself in your cloak, the ease with which you had expected sleep to come. Instead, you had lain awake in a kind of shocked disbelief as the cold worked its way through every layer, every barrier, finding your body with patient, systematic thoroughness. Your feet had gone numb first, then your hands, then your nose and ears and the exposed curve of your cheek. You had curled tighter, pulled the cloak closer, and still the cold had found you, slipping between wool fibers, sliding along your spine, settling into your joints like water into cracks in stone. By midnight you were shivering so hard your teeth rattled. By the deep middle of the night, you had stopped shivering altogether, and that frightened you more than the shaking had. Thomas had been the one to notice. Thomas, already a veteran of 2 winter campaigns, who moved through the cold with a kind of practiced efficiency that seemed miraculous to you then. He had risen from his own bedroll, leaving its warmth, you realized later, at considerable cost, and had come to where you lay rigid and gasping. He had not said anything about weakness or failure. He had simply opened his own cloak and pulled you against him, wrapping the wool around both of you, sharing the small fortress of warmth his body had managed to build. His chest against your back, his breath against the back of your neck, the solid presence of another human being in the dark. "The cold is not your enemy," he had said quietly, his voice rough with sleep and cold. "Fear is your enemy. The cold simply is. It does not hate you. It does not seek you out. It simply exists, and you exist within it, and your task is to find the balance. To be cold without being afraid of cold. To rest without demanding sleep. To endure without measuring how much longer endurance must last." You had not understood then, not fully. But you had stopped fighting, had let your body relax into the cold instead of bracing against it, and somehow that had made the difference. The cold was still there, it never left, but it became something you could live within rather than something that threatened to extinguish you. Thomas is gone now. He made it through that winter, through the spring campaign, through the long summer march. It was autumn that took him, not cold but fever, his body finally surrendering to some infection that the leech could not draw out, that prayer could not reach. You had been with him at the end, sitting beside his bedroll in a tent much like this one, watching the sweat pour from him in a parody of the cold sweats you had all learned to endure, listening to him ramble in delirium about his village, about apple trees and his mother's bread, about summer. Before he slipped entirely into incoherence, he had gripped your wrist with surprising strength and had looked at you with eyes that seemed briefly clear. "You'll get them through the winter," he had said. Not a question, a statement of fact, as if he could see forward into time, as if he knew. "I don't know how," you had said. "I barely got myself through." "You know," he had said, "you've always known. You just didn't know you knew." And then the fever had taken him again, and by morning he was gone, and you were left with his words like a commission, like a duty handed down. Now, in this tent, in this darkness, you carry that commission still. The men around you, Hugh and Anselm, young Gregory, Marcus with his frost-scarred hands, Simon who never complains, Piers who complains constantly but never falters. They have become your charge in a way the captain's orders never made them. They trust you not because of your rank, which is barely different from theirs, but because you have been here before, because you survived the first winter and learned its lessons and somehow transformed those lessons into small acts of care that make survival possible. You taught them how to dry their boots at night without burning the leather. You showed them the way to wrap their cloaks so no gap opens at the neck. You made them understand that cold feet can be endured but cold feet in wet boots can be death. That pride means nothing measured against the preservation of toes. That there is no shame in standing close to another man's body to share warmth. That sleep in these conditions comes in pieces and fragments and must be accepted as such rather than fought for in exhausting, desperate reaches toward oblivion. These small knowledges, these practical magics, they matter more here than courage, more than strength, more than any virtue the songs celebrate. Survival is not a heroic act, but 1,000 small, careful choices, repeated day after day, night after night, until the patterns become instinct and instinct becomes identity. You are no longer the man who left the valley. You are the man the cold has made you, shaped and tempered like iron and ice rather than fire. The tent flap opens, letting in a blast of air that feels sharp enough to cut. Peter's silhouette appears against the lesser darkness of the pre-dawn world. "Fire watch," he says quietly. "Gregory, Simon, it's your turn." The 2 men stir, and you hear the small sounds of them preparing themselves. The rustle of cloaks being drawn tight, the grunt of effort as cold stiffened bodies force themselves upright, the hiss of indrawn breath as they face the necessity of leaving even the inadequate warmth of the tent for the bitter world outside. Gregory is young, just 17, and every morning you see him gather his courage like a physical thing he must clutch in his hands before he can move. But he moves. He always moves. That is what matters. Keep the flames low, you say softly, the instruction ritual now, repeated every watch change. Feed the coals. Don't let them die, but don't let them leap. Steady warmth lasts longer than bright fire. Yes, Simon says. He is older, steady, a craftsman in his other life. A wheelwright who knows about patient work and sustained attention. He understands fires the way he understands wood and spoke and rim, as something that must be tended with both constancy and sensitivity. They leave, and the tent flap closes, and the darkness resettles around you. You do not try to sleep again. Instead you lie still, listening to the camp come slowly alive around you. Voices now, low and rough-edged with cold. The clank of metal on metal as someone works frozen buckles. The patient chipping of ice. The first crackling intensification of fire as Simon and Gregory build up the flames enough to heat water for the morning meal. You think about the day ahead. Another day of waiting. The army has been encamped here for almost 2 weeks now, waiting for orders that do not come, for supplies that arrive sporadically and never in sufficient quantity, for some decision from the commanders that will either send you forward into the contested territories or back to winter quarters in the south. The waiting is harder than marching, in some ways. When you move, the body generates heat, and the mind has purpose. In stillness, both body and mind begin to turn inward, to circle around questions that have no answers. Why are we here? What are we achieving? When will it end? How much longer must we endure? But you have learned not to ask these questions aloud, and more importantly, not to let them show on your face. The men watch you. Perhaps they do not realize they watch you, but they do, and what they see in your expression shapes their own response to the days. If you show doubt, doubt spreads through the tent like cold through wool. If you show steady patience, they find their own patience, draw it up from reserves they did not know they possessed. This is another thing Thomas taught you, not in words but in the example of his bearing. Leadership, he showed you, is not about grand speeches or dramatic gestures. It is about the set of your shoulders when you wake in the morning cold. It is about the tone of your voice when you give the simplest instructions. It is about remembering a young man's name, noticing when another man's hands are dangerously cold, sharing the warmest position by the fire in quiet rotation, so that no one monopolizes warmth, but no one is forgotten in the cold. You learned this by watching him, and now others learn it by watching you, and this is how knowledge moves through the world of soldiers. Not through manuals or lectures, but through observation and imitation, through the slow transmission of practical wisdom from one body to another, one winter to the next. The light is changing now. Not brightening exactly, but thinning, the darkness becoming less absolute. You sit up carefully, feeling the stiffness in your back, the persistent ache in your left knee where you twisted it during the autumn march, the general soreness that has become so constant you barely notice it until you move. Around you the other men are stirring, and you begin the morning ritual. The redistribution of gear, the inspection of boots and wrappings, the careful attention to small damages that could become large problems if neglected. Hugh's cloak has developed a tear along the hem. You point to it, and he nods, pulls out the small sewing kit he carries. Everyone carries, and begins the repair with fingers that move slowly in the cold but still move, still remember their skill. Anselm's left boot has a loose sole. He notices your glance and grimaces. I know, he says. I've been nursing it. I can make it last a few more days if I'm careful. Let me see, you say, and he hands it over. You examine the stitching, test the separation between sole and upper. It's worse than he suggested, but not beyond field repair. I'll help you reinforce it tonight, you say. We'll use some of the spare leather from the supply allotment. No sense saving it if your boot falls apart. He looks relieved. These small failures of equipment carry a weight of worry that might seem absurd to someone who has never lived like this, but you understand. Your boots are everything. They are the barrier between your feet and the ice, between mobility and helplessness, between keeping your place in the company and being left behind when the march resumes. A man with failing boots is a man whose future has become uncertain in fundamental ways. You dress fully now, adding the outer layers you removed for sleeping, checking each piece. The padded gambeson, the mail shirt heavy and cold, the leather straps and buckles, the sword belt, the knife at your hip, the small pouch where you keep your personal items, a letter from your sister, never sent, the small carved figure your father made you as a child, 3 coins of different denominations from different cities, their edges worn smooth with handling. These objects have no practical value here, but you carry them anyway, small weights of identity in a world that tries constantly to reduce you to simple function. Soldier, body, tool for the purposes of others. Outside, the camp is fully awake now. You push through the tent flap and stand, letting your eyes adjust to the gray light of a winter morning in the ice lands. The sky is clear, which means last night's cold will continue, will probably deepen. The mountains to the north are sharp against the horizon, their peaks white and pitiless. Smoke rises from dozens of fires, thin columns that dissipate quickly in the still air. Men move in the spaces between tents, carrying out the necessary tasks of mourning. Hauling water, distributing what passes for bread, checking on horses and supply wagons, standing watch at the perimeter. The world is almost monochrome. White snow, gray sky, dark figures moving against pale ground. Only the fires provide color, small fierce oranges and yellows that seem like defiance in this landscape that wants to erase all distinction, to reduce everything to cold uniformity. You walk toward the fire where Simon and Gregory tend the watch. They have done well. The flames are steady and the wood is burning efficiently, providing maximum warmth with minimum consumption. A pot of water steams at the fire's edge, not quite boiling but hot enough. This water is precious, melted from snow, strained through cloth to remove the worst impurities, heated at considerable expense of fuel and time. You will drink it as weak tea, or thin porridge, or simply hot water flavored with a little salt. It will warm your core in a way no external heat can match. Gregory looks up as you approach, and you see the exhaustion in his young face. He has not yet learned the soldier's trick of sleeping in small pieces, of surrendering to fragmented rest rather than yearning for the 8 unbroken hours of his former life. He is still fighting the rhythm of this existence, and the fighting costs him more than the cold does. You should rest when your watch ends, you tell him gently. Don't try to stay awake until the midday meal. Sleep now, even if it's just an hour. The body needs what it needs. I'm not tired, he says, which is such an obvious lie that Simon snorts softly. Pride is expensive here, you say, repeating another of Thomas's lessons. It costs more than we can afford. Rest when you can. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Gregory nods, not quite convinced but willing to pretend to be convinced, which is close enough. He will learn or he won't, and if he doesn't, the cold will teach him in ways far less gentle than your words. You accept a cup of the hot water from Simon, wrapping your hands around the rough wooden vessel, letting the heat seep into your palms before you drink. The water tastes of smoke and metal and the faint mineral tang of melted snow, but it is hot, and that makes it delicious in a way that transcends flavor. You drink slowly, letting the warmth spread through your chest, your stomach, radiating outward in a temporary reprieve from the cold that suffuses everything. Other men gather at the fire, those whose watch has ended, and those whose watch is about to begin. And for a few minutes you all stand in a loose circle around the flames, not speaking much, simply being present in this small warm space before the day's duties separate you. These moments of collective quiet have their own value. They remind you that you are part of something larger than your individual suffering, that the cold presses on all of you equally, that survival is a shared project rather than a solitary struggle. The captain emerges from his tent, larger than yours, but not by much, and surveys the camp with the same expression he wears every morning. Grim assessment touched with stubborn determination. He is a good captain, neither brilliant nor incompetent, which in practical terms means he is exactly what you need. He does not waste lives on pointless displays of aggression, but neither does he coddle or make false promises. He tells you what he knows when he knows it, and admits when he does not know, and this basic honesty has earned him a loyalty that more charismatic commanders might envy. He catches your eye and nods, a small gesture of acknowledgement that carries layered meaning. The camp is in order, the men are managing, the situation is unchanged, we continue. You nod back, confirming your half of this silent exchange. Then he moves on toward the command fire where the other officers gather, and you return your attention to your own men, your own immediate circle of responsibility. The day unfolds in its familiar pattern. The morning inspection of the perimeter, the careful rationing of food, the maintenance of equipment, the endless small tasks that fill the hours but never quite occupy the mind. You work on Anselm's boot as promised, sitting beside the fire with leather and awl and waxed thread, your hands remembering skills you learned as a boy watching the village cobbler, never imagining those observations would become crucial knowledge in a frozen camp half a continent from home. The work is meditative in its way, the repetitive motion of needle through leather, the slow building of small secure stitches that will hold sole to upper through more days of frozen ground and rough use. Anselm watches, learning, and you explain what you're doing even though he probably knows, because the explanation is part of the teaching, part of passing along the knowledge that keeps men alive in places like this. The trick is not to pull too tight, you say. Leather shrinks when it freezes, and if the stitches are too taut, they'll snap. You want them firm but with a little give, a little room to move. Strong enough to hold, flexible enough to last. Like everything here, Anselm says, and you realize he's understood the deeper pattern, the principle that applies to more than bootmaking. How to be in this place, in this life. Firm but flexible, strong but not rigid, holding together without breaking under pressure. Yes, you say. Like everything here. The morning passes into afternoon, the light changing in quality though barely in intensity, the gray brightness of midday barely distinguishable from the gray dimness of dawn. You eat the midday meal standing by the fire. Hard bread softened in hot water, a thin stew of dried meat and roots, more water flavored with herbs someone in the supply company seems to believe have medicinal properties. It is not enough food, it is never enough food, but it is what there is, and so you eat it and feel your stomach acknowledge the fuel if not quite feel satisfied. Then, just as you're turning back toward your tent to attend to some task you've now forgotten, you hear the change in the camp's atmosphere. A new note in the general murmur of voices, a shift in the quality of attention. You look toward the eastern edge of camp and see riders approaching, moving slowly through the snow, their horses picking careful paths through the frozen ground. Messengers from the command structure, you realize, or perhaps scouts returning with news. Either way, it means something is about to change, some decision has been made, some new phase is beginning. Around you, other men have noticed too, and the camp's activity subtly reorients itself. Everyone continuing their tasks but now with attention divided, waiting to hear what news the riders bring. The riders reach the command fire, and you watch as they dismount, as they speak with the captain and the other officers. As the conversation continues for long minutes with much gesturing toward the north, toward the mountains. Then the captain turns and calls for the company to gather, and you feel the day's shape shift entirely, the routine breaking open to reveal whatever comes next. You move with the others toward the central clearing, and as you walk, you find yourself thinking not of what the news might be, but of what it will mean to break camp, to move again. Part of you dreads it, the effort of packing, the labor of marching through snow and ice, the exposure to wind and weather that even this inadequate camp provides some shelter against. But another part of you, the part that Thomas's training cultivated, almost welcomes it. Movement is purpose. Movement is heat. Movement is a reprieve from the slow mental erosion of waiting. The company gathers, not just your tent group but all of them, perhaps 200 men in various states of cold weather dress, all wearing the same expression of wary attention. The captain stands before you, his back to the command fire so that he appears as a dark figure haloed by flame, and when he speaks, his voice carries clearly in the cold, still air. We have our orders, he says. We march north at first light tomorrow. The fortress at Kalvik has requested reinforcement. There's been movement from the northern tribes, and command wants our presence as deterrent and support. It's a 3-day march in good conditions. In these conditions, call it 5 days. Maybe 6. A murmur runs through the gathered company, not quite complaint, but not enthusiasm either. 5 or 6 days of marching through this cold, through this landscape. You see the calculations happening on every face. What this will cost, what it will require, whether the bodies that have barely managed to survive stillness can possibly sustain motion. But you also see acceptance. This is what you signed for, agreed to, committed to when you took the coin and the oath. The work is not to question but to endure, not to choose but to do what is chosen for you, to place one foot before another until you arrive or fall, and even then to keep faith with the company, with the men beside you, with the small circle of shared obligation that is the only thing more powerful than the cold. We'll pack the camp this afternoon, the captain continues. Travel light. We'll cache what we can't carry and mark it for recovery later. Stay warm tonight, eat what you need to eat, burn what fuel we have. Tomorrow we need every man capable of the march. No one gets left behind because they tried to be noble about rations. He looks across the gathered faces, and his gaze seems to rest on each man individually for just a moment. I know you're tired, he says, and his voice is not unkind. I know you're cold. I know you've been waiting for orders that made sense, and instead you got orders that ask more of you. But this is the work. This is what we do. We march, we arrive, we hold the line, we come home. In that order. Together. It is not a rousing speech, not the kind of thing that would sound impressive if sung by a bard in a warm hall. But here, in this moment, it is exactly what is needed. Acknowledgement without pity, expectation without false inspiration, the simple statement of what comes next and the assumption that you will meet it. Get to work, the captain says, and dismisses you with a gesture, and the company begins to break apart, men returning to their tents to begin the work of preparation. You walk back with your tent mates, and the work begins. The careful packing of gear, the selection of what must come and what can be left, the distribution of weight, so that no man carries more than his strength can sustain over days of marching. This is choreography you've performed before, a dance of practicality and compromise, and your body remembers the movements even as your mind focuses on the small decisions each choice requires. The sheepskins must come. They are too valuable to cache, too essential for sleeping in whatever shelter you find at the end of each day's march. The tent itself will be divided among you, each man carrying a section. Food, water, weapons, basic tools, a change of wool if there's room, medical supplies. Everything else. The small comforts you've accumulated, the extra firewood, the items cached against future need. All of it must stay behind, marked and covered against snow, waiting for recovery that may or may not come. By the time the light begins to fail, the work is largely done. The camp has transformed from a settled place, worn into the landscape by weeks of occupation, into something temporary again, ready to dissolve at dawn and move like a living thing across the frozen miles. You feel the shift in atmosphere, the way waiting has given way to purpose, the way even the cold seems less oppressive now that there is clear work ahead. That night, the captain makes good on his word. The fires burn higher than usual, the rations are distributed with unusual generosity, and for a few hours before sleep, the camp feels almost warm, almost festive. Not quite celebration, but something adjacent to it. Relief at having a path forward, solidarity in facing what comes next, the grim comfort of shared fate. You sit with your tent mates around your fire, eating slowly, letting the warmth of food and flames seep into your bones while you can. Conversation flows more easily tonight, stories exchanged, small jokes that are more about the comfort of familiar voices than about humor. Marcus tells about his first winter campaign, laughing now at miseries that were not funny then. Hugh wonders aloud what Kalvik is like. None of you have been there, and Piers invents increasingly absurd descriptions until even Gregory is smiling. And through it all, you feel the weight of tomorrow settling on your shoulders, not oppressive but substantial. 5 days of marching, maybe 6, through cold that will make today's cold seem merciful. Toward a fortress where some threat waits, some need requires your presence, your body, your willingness to stand between stone walls and whatever comes against them. You do not think about the larger politics that have brought you here, the dynastic ambitions or trade disputes or ancient grievances that, in their abstract way, have placed you on this frozen ground so far from home. Those things are too distant, too large to grasp. Instead, you think about immediate things. The men around this fire, the pack you'll carry tomorrow, the boots on your feet, and whether they'll last 5 days, the memory of Thomas's voice telling you that you'll get them through the winter. Later, in the tent, in the darkness, wrapped in your cloak and lying on sheepskins that tomorrow you'll carry on your back, you let yourself think briefly of home. Not with longing. Longing is dangerous here, corrosive to the focus you need to survive, but with a kind of gentle acknowledgement. There is a place where you came from. There are people who knew you as something other than a soldier. There is a version of yourself that exists in their memory, a younger, warmer self who did not yet know what cold truly means, who believed that comfort was a natural state rather than a rare and precious exception. That person still exists, you think, somewhere inside this body that has learned to endure what once would have seemed unendurable. When you return, if you return, you will be both that person and this one, the boy from the valley and the man the ice made. The challenge will be integrating them, finding a way to be whole after being so thoroughly changed. But that is a problem for another time, for some future that may or may not arrive. Tonight, you have a simpler task. Sleep as much as the cold allows, rise at dawn, shoulder your pack, and begin walking north. Everything else is speculation. Everything else is beyond your control. You close your eyes and let yourself slip into the familiar half-sleep of cold nights. your mind skating across the surface of dreams without quite descending into them, your body maintaining the careful vigilance that keeps you breathing, keeps you warm enough, keeps you alive through one more night in the ice. Tomorrow you think we march, and somehow, in the cold and the dark, with the weight of what's coming settling around you like snow, you find that thought not frightening but almost comforting. At least you will be moving. At least the waiting will be done. You wake before the trumpet sounds, before the sun has lifted itself fully above the white horizon. And for a moment you lie still beneath the weight of pelts and blankets, feeling the slow return of warmth to your fingers, the gradual release of night's grip on your body. The air inside the tent is cold but not cruel, tempered by the collective heat of those who share this small shelter. And you breathe slowly, watching your breath rise like thin smoke in the dim light that filters through canvas and hide. There is no hurry in this waking, no sudden alarm, only the quiet knowledge that another day has arrived and you have survived another night on the frozen plain. Around you, the other men begin to stir, their movements gentle and unhurried, each attending to the private rituals of mourning. The stretching of stiff limbs, the careful rewrapping of foot cloths, the quiet assessment of how the body has weathered the dark hours. No one speaks yet. The silence is a kind of grace, a shared understanding that the transition from sleep to wakefulness deserves respect, that the mind needs time to gather itself before words can be formed, before the demands of the day can be acknowledged and met. You sit up slowly, feeling the familiar ache in your lower back, the stiffness in your shoulders that comes from sleeping on frozen ground despite all the layers you place between yourself and the earth. This discomfort is so constant now that it has become almost comfortable in its familiarity, a reminder that you are alive, that your body continues to function despite everything asked of it. You flex your fingers, working sensation back into joints that have grown cold in the night, and you think about how strange it is that such small movements, the closing of a fist, the rotation of a wrist, can feel like victories, like affirmations of your continued existence in this harsh place. The young squire from the neighboring tent appears at your entrance, his face red with cold, but his eyes bright with the energy that still comes easily to those who have not yet spent many winters in the field. He carries hot stones wrapped in cloth, offerings of warmth that he distributes to each tent as part of his duties, and you accept yours with a nod of gratitude, holding it between your palms, feeling the heat seep into your skin like a small blessing. He moves on without speaking, understanding perhaps that words are not yet welcome in this early hour, that the men need to come to themselves slowly, to remember who they are before they can become soldiers again. You hold the warm stone against your chest, beneath the layers of wool and leather, and you close your eyes for a moment, absorbing not just the physical heat but the thoughtfulness behind it, the way that even in this remote place, even in conditions that strip away so much of what makes life gentle, small acts of consideration continue to occur. Someone thought to heat these stones. Someone took the time to wrap them carefully and distribute them while others still slept. These gestures matter more than any grand proclamation, more than speeches about honor or duty. They are the threads that hold the fabric of your shared existence together, the tiny stitches that prevent the whole garment from unraveling in the cold. Outside, the camp is beginning its slow awakening, the sounds drifting through canvas like a familiar melody. The crunch of boots on frozen snow, the low murmur of voices, the clatter of wooden bowls and metal cups as the cook fires are tended and the morning meal prepared. You can smell smoke now, sharp and clean in the cold air, and beneath it the faint scent of porridge, of salted meat, of bread if you are fortunate. Your stomach tightens with hunger, but it is a manageable hunger, not the desperate emptiness that sometimes came in the early days of the campaign when supply lines were uncertain and rations were cut to bare minimum. You begin the process of preparing yourself for the day, each action performed with the precision that has become second nature over these long weeks. You check your feet first, examining the skin for any signs of damage, any spots of white that might indicate the beginning of frostbite, any blisters or sores that need attention before they worsen. Finding nothing alarming, you rewrap them carefully in fresh cloth, layering the fabric in the way you have learned provides the best protection, the best balance between warmth and mobility. Your boots are stiff with cold, and you work them with your hands before putting them on, trying to restore some flexibility to the frozen leather. Your fingers move through these tasks with practiced efficiency, but your mind drifts, thinking about the night just past, about the dream you had in those hours before dawn. You were walking through snow, but it was a different snow, softer somehow, falling gently in a place you recognized from childhood. a field near your village where you used to play before your life took the shape it now holds. In the dream, you were not cold. The snow touched your face like a blessing, and you felt light, unburdened by armor or obligation. You woke from this dream with a feeling you could not name, something between longing and contentment, and even now, as you lace your boots and prepare to face another day of ice and duty, that feeling lingers, a small warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with heated stones or layered wool. The tent flap opens and the sergeant enters, bringing with him a gust of frigid air and the particular energy that always surrounds him, a kind of controlled urgency that never quite becomes harshness. He looks at each of you in turn, his eyes quick and assessing, reading in your faces and postures whether anyone needs special attention, whether anyone is struggling more than usual. He has developed this skill over many campaigns, this ability to see beneath the surface of discipline and routine to the actual state of the men under his command, and it is one of the reasons you trust him, one of the reasons you can endure what this life demands. "Weather's holding," he says, his voice rough with cold but steady. "No new snow in the night. Scouts say the pass ahead is clear enough for moving if we're careful." You nod, absorbing this information without comment. Movement means breaking camp, which means work, which means another day of cold feet and aching backs. But it also means progress, means that you are not simply enduring the winter, but accomplishing something within it, moving toward whatever objective lies ahead in the campaign's larger design. There is comfort in this, in knowing that your suffering has purpose, that each difficult day brings you closer to the moment when you might return home, when the warmth of your own hearth might replace these cold tents and frozen plains. The sergeant continues with the day's assignments, speaking in the calm, matter-of-fact tone he uses for routine communications. Someone must check the supply sleds for damage from the cold. Someone must help the farriers with the horses, whose care becomes more complicated in these temperatures. Someone must reinforce the windbreaks around the perimeter tents, where the canvas takes the worst of the weather. These are not glamorous tasks, not the stuff of songs or stories, but they are the real work of survival in winter campaigns, the unglamorous labor that makes the difference between an army that can function and one that falls apart beneath the weight of harsh conditions. You are assigned to help with the sleds, and you accept this duty without complaint, knowing it could be worse, knowing that at least you will be moving, generating warmth through activity, rather than standing watch at some exposed position where the wind cuts through every layer and the cold slowly drains the life from your body. Movement is a gift in this climate, a way to fight back against the numbness that is always trying to claim your extremities, to silence the persistent voice in your mind that whispers about warmth, about comfort, about all the things you have left behind. Before leaving the tent, you take a moment to straighten your sleeping area, to fold your blankets in the precise way that allows them to retain their shape and insulating properties, to arrange your few possessions with the care they deserve. This small ritual of ordering your space has become important to you, a way of maintaining dignity in circumstances that could easily strip it away, a daily affirmation that you are more than just a body moving through cold and difficulty, that you retain the capacity for deliberateness, for attention to detail, for the small courtesies that define civilized life even in uncivilized places. Outside, the morning has taken on the particular quality of light that you have come to associate with clear winter days in this latitude, sharp and brilliant, the sun reflecting off snow with an intensity that makes you squint despite the cold. The camp spreads around you in its familiar configuration, tents arranged in orderly rows, supply wagons clustered near the center, horses corralled in the most sheltered area available. Smoke rises from a dozen cook fires, straight columns in the still air, and everywhere men are moving with purpose, attending to the 1,000 tasks that keep an army functioning in hostile conditions. You make your way toward the supply sleds, your breath forming clouds that dissipate quickly in the dry air, and you notice how your body has adjusted to this environment over the weeks, how what once felt unbearable now feels merely difficult, how you have learned to function with a level of discomfort that would have seemed impossible when you first arrived in this frozen land. This adaptation is not conscious, not something you can take credit for exactly, but rather something that has happened to you, a transformation worked by necessity and repetition and the simple refusal to surrender to circumstances. The sleds are massive wooden constructions reinforced with iron, designed to carry heavy loads across snow and ice, and your task is to check the leather straps that secure the cargo, to look for any signs of wear or damage that might cause problems during the day's movement. The leather is stiff with cold, resistant to your touch, and you work slowly, running your hands along each strap, feeling for cracks or weak points, testing tension and security. This is tedious work, requiring attention but not much thought, and your mind is free to wander as your hands move through their repetitive tasks. You think about the people who made these sleds, craftsmen in some distant city or town who shaped this wood and hammered this iron, who cut and stitched this leather, never knowing where their work would end up, never imagining perhaps that their creations would be hauling supplies across frozen plains in service of a campaign whose purpose they might not understand or care about. There is something humbling in this recognition, this awareness of how many hands and skills are required to put even a single soldier in the field, how much invisible labor supports the visible actions of armies and kingdoms. A man works beside you in silence for a time, checking the opposite side of the same sled, and you recognize him as someone from another company, someone you have exchanged nods with, but never spoken to at length. He works with the same careful attention you apply to your own task, his movements efficient and practiced, and there is something companionable about this shared labor, this parallel effort toward a common goal. After a while, he speaks without looking up from his work. "Getting warmer," he says, his voice neutral, making an observation rather than a complaint or celebration. You consider this, noting that yes, the temperature does feel slightly less severe than it did at dawn, that the sun, though weak, is providing some measure of heat beyond its light. Might reach freezing by midday, you reply, knowing that what would seem brutally cold in another context is considered relatively mild here, a reprieve from the deeper cold that characterizes night and early morning. He nods, continuing his inspection of straps and buckles. Be good for moving. Less chance the runners stick, less strain on the horses. This is true, and you appreciate his practical focus, his ability to find the useful aspects of changing conditions, rather than simply enduring them passively. This is the difference between men who survive these campaigns relatively intact, and those who break under the accumulated weight of hardship. Not superior strength or courage necessarily, but rather a certain cast of mind, an ability to engage constructively with circumstances rather than merely resisting them. The two of you continue working, exchanging occasional brief comments, and the conversation, minimal though it is, provides a kind of nourishment that has nothing to do with food or warmth. You are reminded that you are part of something larger than your own individual struggle, that all around you are men engaged in similar efforts, making similar adjustments, finding similar small victories in each day that passes without disaster. This shared experience, rarely articulated but deeply felt, is perhaps the strongest thread binding the army together, stronger than formal discipline or fear of punishment, stronger even than loyalty to lord or king. By the time you finish checking your assigned sleds, the sun has climbed higher and the camp's activity has increased in both volume and pace. Orders are being shouted, not harshly but with the clarity and projection necessary to be heard across distances in open air. Tents are coming down in a coordinated ballet of practiced movements, canvas being folded and rolled, poles being disassembled and secured for travel, stakes being pulled from frozen ground with tools designed specifically for that purpose. You have participated in this process dozens of times now, and you marvel at how efficient it has become, how quickly an entire camp can be reduced to its portable components, how what looks like chaos to an untrained eye is actually an intricate choreography of specific actions performed in deliberate sequence. You return to your own tent to help with its dismantling, joining the familiar crew of men who share your shelter, and together you work through the process with minimal verbal communication, each knowing his role, each moving to the next task without needing to be told. There is satisfaction in this competence, in the smooth execution of complex coordinated action, and you find yourself experiencing something close to contentment as you fold heavy canvas and secure rolled bundles with practiced knots. As you work, you notice the young soldier who struggled so much in the early days, the one who seemed as if he might not survive his first week in these conditions. He is working steadily at the next tent over, his movements no longer hesitant or uncertain, but rather assured and effective, and you realize that he has made the same adaptation you have observed in yourself, that he has found his way through difficulty to a place of greater confidence and capability. You catch his eye across the space between tents, and he nods to you, a simple acknowledgement that carries within it recognition of what has been endured and overcome. The horses are being harnessed to the sleds and wagons, a process that requires patience and skill because the animals are themselves affected by the cold, their usual responsiveness sometimes dulled by discomfort and the extra effort required to move through snow. You watch as the farriers and handlers work with firm gentleness, talking to the horses in low voices, touching them with confident hands that convey reassurance along with instruction. The relationship between soldier and animal in these campaigns is one of mutual dependence, and you have come to appreciate the intelligence and will of horses in a way you never did before, seeing how much they contribute to the collective effort of movement and survival. The march, when it begins, is neither inspiring nor particularly dramatic. It is simply the next necessary thing, the continuation of a journey that has already lasted longer than you expected, that may last longer still. You fall into your assigned position in the column, feeling the weight of your pack settle onto shoulders that have grown accustomed to it, finding your rhythm of walking that allows you to cover distance without exhausting yourself too quickly. The snow beneath your boots is packed and relatively firm, better conditions for marching than the fresh powder that sometimes slows progress to an exhausting crawl. As you walk, you enter a state that you have come to recognize as the peculiar consciousness of long marches. Not quite alert, but not asleep, your body moving automatically while your mind drifts through memories and observations and thoughts that have no particular urgency or direction. This is different from the sharp attention required during active danger, different from the focused concentration needed for specific tasks. But it is a useful state nonetheless, a way of conserving mental energy while covering the physical distance that must be covered. The landscape you move through is beautiful in its severity, all white plains and distant mountains, sparse winter vegetation creating subtle patterns of texture and shadow against the snow. The sky above is pale blue, cloudless, vast in a way that makes you feel both insignificant and somehow connected to something larger than your individual existence. You have learned to appreciate this beauty even while suffering through the hardship it represents, have discovered that cold and difficulty do not negate wonder, that you can simultaneously long for warmth and shelter while still recognizing the stark magnificence of this frozen world. The column moves steadily through the morning and into midday, with brief halts called periodically to check equipment, to adjust loads that have shifted, to allow men and animals to catch their breath. During these pauses, you stand in place rather than sitting, knowing from experience that sitting in the cold makes it harder to get moving again, that maintaining some level of circulation and muscle engagement serves you better than seeking temporary relief from the weight of your pack. At one halt, the sergeant moves along the line, checking on each man with the same assessing eye he turned on you at dawn, and when he reaches you, he pauses for a moment, studying your face. "Feet good?" he asks, his standard question, the first concern always being whether anyone is developing frostbite or serious blisters that might prevent them from continuing. "Feet are good," you reply, and it is true, you have managed your foot care well enough that you are suffering no more than the usual discomfort, nothing that threatens your ability to function. He nods, satisfied, but does not move on immediately. "You're doing well," he says quietly, a rare direct compliment. Some of the newer men look to you, see you keeping steady. It helps them. This surprises you, the idea that others might be taking cues from your behavior, that your private effort to maintain your own equilibrium might be serving some larger purpose. You do not know how to respond, so you simply nod, accepting his words without false modesty or excessive pride. After he moves on, you stand a little straighter despite the weight of your pack, feeling the burden of being observed, but also the quiet satisfaction of being seen as reliable, as someone who can be counted on not to break when breaking would be the easier choice. The march continues into afternoon, the sun beginning its early descent toward the western horizon, the light taking on the golden quality that precedes evening. You are tired now in a deep, thorough way, fatigue reaching into your bones, but it is a bearable tiredness, one you know from experience you can sustain for some hours, yet if necessary. Around you, the other men are showing similar signs of weariness. Movements becoming slightly more mechanical, conversations dying away, each person retreating into their own internal space, where the work of continuing happens mostly in silence. When the order finally comes to halt for the day, to establish camp for the coming night, you feel a wash of relief that is almost physical, as if your body has been waiting for permission to acknowledge how much effort it has been expending. The process of setting up camp begins immediately, the same choreography you performed in reverse this morning now being enacted again, tents being erected, fire pits being established, all the structures of temporary habitation being called into existence with practiced efficiency. You work with your tent crew to raise your shelter, driving stakes into ground that is slightly less frozen than it was at the previous site, your muscles remembering exactly what effort is required for each action, your hands knowing without conscious thought how to tie the knots that will keep canvas secure against wind. By the time the tent is up and your sleeping area is arranged, full dark is approaching, the sky deepening through shades of blue toward black, stars beginning to emerge in the east where night has already claimed dominion. The evening meal is distributed, hot porridge thick with oats and flavored with dried meat, a piece of hard bread, weak ale that tastes slightly of the barrel it was transported in. You eat slowly, savoring each bite not because it is particularly delicious, but because it represents fuel, warmth, continuation, because it is the difference between having strength for tomorrow and arriving at tomorrow already depleted. Around you, men eat with similar deliberateness, the usual camp conversation emerging gradually as bellies fill and the day's exertions begin to settle into memory rather than immediate experience. Someone starts a song, an old marching song with a melody that is more rhythm than tune, and others join in, voices rough and unpolished but sincere, the singing itself more important than any aesthetic quality it might or might not possess. You add your own voice to the collective sound, feeling the vibration of singing in your chest, experiencing again that sense of being part of something larger than yourself, of contributing your small thread to a fabric that is woven from many such threads, each individual but gaining meaning and strength from connection with all the others. The fire burns down to coals, radiating heat that reaches your face and hands, but does not penetrate to your core, and gradually the group around it begins to disperse, men returning to their tents to begin the evening rituals of preparation for sleep. You linger a moment longer, looking into the glowing embers, seeing patterns in the red heat that your tired mind turns into landscapes, faces, memories. Then you too rise and make your way to your tent, to the space that has become as close to home as anything you will know until this campaign releases you to return to your actual home, if that day ever comes. Inside the tent, the familiar routine unfolds. The arrangement of blankets and pelts, the careful placement of tomorrow's clothes where they can be easily found in darkness, the checking of feet one last time before they are wrapped for the night. The young soldier who shares your tent is already lying down, and you can see in the dim light that he is writing something on a small piece of parchment, scratching letters carefully with a bit of charcoal. He notices you watching and looks up, slightly embarrassed. "Letter to my mother," he explains quietly. "Don't know when I'll be able to send it, but helps to write to her. Makes it feel like she's not so far away." You nod, understanding this impulse, this need to reach across distance towards something familiar and beloved. "That's good," you say. "She'll be glad to receive it whenever it reaches her." He returns to his writing, and you finish your own preparations, settling into your sleeping space with the particular mixture of discomfort and relief that characterizes the transition to rest after a day of exertion. Your body is tired in ways that sleep will not fully restore, aches that will still be present come morning. But there is also a sense of accomplishment, of having met the day's demands without failing, of having contributed to the collective effort in whatever small ways were asked of you. As drowsiness begins to claim you, your thoughts turn to the night ahead, to the cold that will come with deeper darkness, to the dreams that might visit you in the hours before dawn. You think about the heated stones that will arrive with morning, about the sergeant's words acknowledging your steadiness, about the young soldier writing to his mother in the tent's dim interior. You think about all the small threads that connect you to these men and to this experience, about how suffering shared becomes somehow more bearable than suffering endured alone. The wind picks up outside, making the canvas ripple and snap, but the sound is familiar now, almost comforting in its predictability, and you know that the tent will hold, that the stakes are driven deep enough, that you and your companions will wake again when morning comes. This knowledge, simple and certain, is enough to allow you to release your grip on consciousness, to let sleep come with its healing darkness, to trust that you will find the strength to face another day when that day arrives. In this space between waking and sleep, between the day just ended and the one not yet begun, you feel something that might be peace, or at least acceptance, a recognition that you are exactly where you are, doing exactly what you are doing, and that for now, in this moment, that is enough. The cold presses close, but within your nest of blankets and pelts, within the shared warmth of men who have become brothers through proximity and hardship, you are as safe as circumstances allow, as comfortable as this life permits. And so you sleep, one more soldier in an army of men who sleep on ice, who wake to cold and duty, who find ways to endure what must be endured, who keep faith with each other even when other faiths seem distant or difficult to hold. The long night stretches ahead, but you have survived many such nights, and the habit of survival has become strong enough to carry you through darkness toward whatever dawn awaits on the other side of sleep. You wake before dawn on what you sense will be the final morning of the watch, though no one has spoken the words aloud. The knowledge lives in the quality of the silence, in the way the camp has begun to hold itself differently, like a body gathering its strength before rising from a long rest. The air inside the tent carries a peculiar stillness, not the stillness of deep winter, but something lighter, something that tastes faintly of transition. You lie still for a moment, feeling the weight of furs across your chest, the familiar pressure of wool against your skin, and you realize that these sensations, which once felt like mere survival, have become a kind of home. The canvas overhead shows the first gray hint of approaching light, that particular shade that comes before color returns to the world. You can hear Osric breathing somewhere to your left, slow and steady, the breath of someone who has learned to sleep deeply even in difficult places. Across the tent, you sense rather than see the shapes of the others, each wrapped in their cocoons of fabric and fur, each suspended in that last hour of rest before the day makes its claims. You have learned all their patterns of breathing, the small sounds they make in sleep, the way each man arranges himself in the darkness. These details have become part of your own internal map, markers by which you orient yourself in the night. You think about the accumulated nights, the way they have stacked themselves into something larger than their individual parts. Each night was its own small world, its own contained struggle and small victory. But taken together they form a kind of chronicle, a record written not in words but in the body's memory, in the mind's catalog of sensation and adaptation. You remember the first nights, when the cold seemed like an enemy too large to comprehend, when every hour felt precarious and uncertain. You remember the middle nights, when routine began to establish itself, when the small rituals of warmth and rest became familiar enough to provide a kind of comfort. And now these final nights, when you find yourself able to rest more deeply, to trust the structures you and your companions have built against the dark and the cold. The temperature has shifted in recent days. It is still cold, profoundly so by any measure that does not involve months of winter campaign, but there is something different in the quality of it now. The air no longer has that knife-edge sharpness that made each breath a small act of endurance. The wind, when it comes, no longer carries quite the same penetrating ferocity. These are subtle changes, nothing dramatic, but to bodies that have learned to read every nuance of cold, they speak clearly of seasons beginning their slow turn toward spring. You know it will be weeks yet before anything like warmth returns, months before the ice begins its retreat, but the direction has been established, the axis has begun its tilt back toward the sun. You ease yourself upright slowly, careful not to disturb those still sleeping. The cold air meets your face and hands, bracing but no longer shocking. Your body has learned to manage these transitions, to move between the warmth of the bedding and the chill of the tent without the violent shivering that marked your first mornings. You reach for your outer layers, pulling them on with practiced efficiency, each garment sliding into its proper place in the architecture of warmth. The wool is still slightly damp from yesterday's wear, but you have learned that this is normal, expected, that it will dry against your body heat as the day progresses. Outside, the camp is just beginning to stir. You can hear the low murmur of voices from the fire pits, the soft clank of metal as someone tends to a pot, the crunch of footsteps on frozen ground. The sky to the east shows the first pale wash of color, not quite pink, not quite gold, but something between the two, delicate as breath on glass. The stars are fading, withdrawing into the lightning vault of heaven, though the brightest still hold their positions, refusing to surrender until the last possible moment. You make your way to the fire circle, where a small group has already gathered. The fire burns low but steady, its light painting warm tones across the faces of the men who stand around it. They nod in greeting, but do not speak much. At this hour, words feel unnecessary, almost intrusive. There is a quality to this pre-dawn time that invites silence, that asks you to simply be present without the need for commentary or conversation. You take your place in the circle, extending your hands toward the flames, and let the warmth seep slowly into your palms and fingers. Someone passes you a cup of warm broth, and you accept it gratefully, wrapping both hands around the crude wooden vessel. The liquid is thin, flavored with herbs and salt, nothing elaborate, but it is hot and it is offered with kindness, and in this context that makes it precious. You sip slowly, letting each mouthful warm your throat and chest, feeling the heat spread outward through your body like light through water. Around you, others do the same, each man lost in his own small sphere of sensation, each tending to his own internal fire. The sergeant emerges from one of the larger tents, his breath visible in the cold air, and makes his way to the fire. He looks tired but satisfied, like someone who has carried a weight for a long time and can now begin to imagine setting it down. He surveys the camp with the practiced eye of long experience, noting the state of the tents, the condition of the men, the quality of the morning light. You see him nod to himself, some internal calculation confirming what he needed to know. "Word came in the night," he says quietly, his voice carrying just far enough to reach those gathered at the fire. "The main column will reach us by midday. We'll be breaking camp tomorrow, moving back to join the consolidated winter garrison." He pauses, letting the information settle. "You've done well," he adds, and though the words are simple, you hear in them genuine respect, the acknowledgement of one soldier to others who have met the demands placed upon them. The news spreads through the camp gradually, not with excitement or dramatic reaction, but with a kind of quiet acknowledgement, a collective exhale. This is what you have been working toward, the completion of this particular duty. But now that it arrives, it feels less like a finish line and more like a natural progression, one phase giving way to the next. There is relief, certainly, but it is tempered by something else, perhaps pride, perhaps simply the satisfaction of having endured and adapted, of having learned the difficult lessons that this place and this season had to teach. The day unfolds with deliberate purpose. There are preparations to make, gear to organize, the countless small tasks required when a camp prepares to transition from sustained occupation to departure. But there is no rush, no frantic scramble. The work proceeds with the steady rhythm you have all developed over these weeks, each person knowing their role, each task flowing naturally into the next. You find yourself working alongside Thomas, the two of you checking tent stakes and folding canvas, and the work feels companionable, easy, the labor of people who have learned to move together without constant negotiation. "Strange to think of leaving," Thomas says at one point, his hands busy with a length of rope. "Got used to this place, somehow. Won't miss the cold, but..." He trails off, searching for the right words. There's something about it, something that stays with you. You understand what he means without needing him to elaborate further. This camp, this frozen stretch of land, these harsh conditions, they have marked you all, written themselves into your experience in ways that will endure long after you have returned to more comfortable circumstances. Not because the time here was pleasant, but because it was real, because it demanded everything you had and you found that you had enough to give. That kind of knowledge changes you, quietly but permanently. The morning advances toward noon, and the light grows brighter though not warmer. The landscape stretches in all directions, white and gray and silver under a sky that is cleared to pale blue. From certain angles, in certain lights, it is beautiful, austere and unforgiving, yes, but beautiful in the way that extreme things can be, in their refusal to compromise or soften themselves for human comfort. You have learned to see this beauty over the course of your time here, learned to appreciate it without needing to possess it or control it, learned to exist within it as one more creature adapted to its demands. Around midday, a scout returns from the eastern approach and speaks briefly with the sergeant. A few minutes later, you see them, a dark line on the horizon, growing gradually larger, resolving slowly into the shapes of men and horses and supply wagons. The main column, arriving as promised. The sight produces a strange mixture of feelings. Relief that the solitary vigil is ending, satisfaction that you have held the position until properly relieved, but also something like regret, the knowledge that this particular chapter is closing and whatever it contained, for good or ill, will not come again in quite the same way. The column reaches the camp in the early afternoon, bringing with it noise and movement, and the organized chaos of a larger military force. The officer in command confers with your sergeant, their breath mingling in the cold air as they speak. Orders are given, received, acknowledged. Your small garrison is commended for maintaining the position through the deepest part of winter. The words are formal, official, but you hear in them genuine recognition, and it matters, you find, more than you expected it would. The rest of the day passes in a blur of activity as the camp transforms, absorbing the newcomers, reorganizing itself around new priorities and structures. You find yourself with occasional pockets of free time, moments when your particular skills are not immediately needed. And in these moments you walk the perimeter of the camp one last time, memorizing details you know will fade from immediate memory, but which might surface years from now in dreams or sudden recollections. You pause at the northern edge, where the land slopes gently down toward the frozen expanse that stretches toward the horizon. The ice field lies quiet under the afternoon sun, its surface marked with patterns of wind and snow, a text written in a language you have begun to learn. You think about all the nights you stood watch here, all the times you lay in the tent listening to the wind prowl around the canvas, all the small moments of cold and endurance and unexpected beauty. They are yours now, part of your story, woven into the fabric of who you are and who you will become. Evening arrives with its familiar rituals of fire and food and the gathering of bodies against the cold. But tonight there are more people, more voices, and the character of the camp has changed. It is still cold, still austere, but it no longer feels as isolated, as perched on the edge of the world. The main column has brought with it a connection to the larger army, to the network of camps and garrisons that sustain the winter campaign. You are no longer an outpost, but a point of convergence, and the psychological shift is palpable. You eat your evening meal with Osric and Thomas, and some of the others who have shared these weeks with you. There is quiet talk, occasional laughter, the easy interaction of people who have come to know each other in circumstances that strip away pretense and reveal character. Someone mentions a particular night when the wind was especially fierce, and the memory triggers others. And soon you are all engaged in the gentle archaeology of shared experience, excavating moments that have already taken on the quality of story. Remember when the supply wagon got stuck halfway up the eastern approach? Osric says, grinning. Took 6 of us 3 hours to get it free, and by the end we were caked in ice and mud and swearing we'd never felt colder in our lives. And then that night turned out to be one of the mildest we had, Thomas adds, shaking his head. Barely froze at all. The laughter that follows is warm, inclusive, the laughter of people who have earned the right to find humor in past hardship because they survived it together. You contribute your own memories, moments that stood out to you, and you realize that each person's account of these weeks is slightly different, that each of you has lived through the same time and place, but experienced it through your own particular lens of personality and perception. Together, these individual accounts form a kind of collective memory, richer and more complete than any single version could be. As full darkness settles over the camp, you make your way back to your tent. Tomorrow will bring more preparations, more work, and then the departure, the march back to the consolidated garrison. But tonight there is still this, the familiar canvas, the arrangement of bedding and supplies, the space that has been your shelter through the hardest part of winter. You tend to your gear methodically, checking straps and buckles, making sure everything is secure and ready for travel. The work is meditative, requiring attention but not intense concentration, and your mind drifts as your hands move through familiar tasks. You think about home, that distant place that has become increasingly abstract over the course of the campaign. You wonder what season it is there, whether the first signs of spring have appeared, whether the world you knew has changed in your absence. But these thoughts lack urgency. Home will be there when you return, and you will be there to see it, and the time between now and then is simply time to be lived, one day following another in the endless procession that marks all human experience. Osric enters the tent, stamping snow from his boots, and begins his own evening preparations. The two of you work in comfortable silence, the kind that no longer needs to be filled with conversation. He settles into his sleeping area with a satisfied grunt, and you hear him adjusting furs and blankets, finding his preferred arrangement. Last night in this particular pile of canvas, he observes, his voice drowsy. Won't miss the cold, but it's been something. It has, you agree quietly. Something. You finish your own preparations and ease yourself into your bedding. The furs and blankets receive you with familiar softness, the layers settling around your body like the embrace of an old friend. The cold is there, as always, pressing in from beyond the canvas, but it no longer feels threatening. You have learned its language, learned how to exist within its presence, and this knowledge makes it bearable, even in some strange way companionable. Outside, you can hear the sounds of the expanded camp settling into night. More voices than you have grown accustomed to, more movement, but somehow this feels right, appropriate to the moment of transition. You listen to the sounds gradually diminish as sleep claims more and more of the camp, as the fires burn down to coals, as the night asserts its ancient claim on human activity. Your thoughts drift without direction or purpose, touching lightly on memories of the past weeks, on anticipation of the movement ahead, on the simple sensation of lying warm and safe in a cold place. There is no drama to these thoughts, no particular insight or revelation, just the quiet movement of a mind at ease, reviewing experience without needing to judge or analyze it. You become aware, gradually, that you are deeply tired. Not the desperate exhaustion of the early days, but a good tiredness, the kind that comes from sustained effort and the knowledge that the effort was worthwhile. Your body feels heavy, relaxed, ready for deep rest. Your breathing slows naturally, finding its own rhythm, and you let yourself sink into the sensation of simply being here, in this moment, in this place, alive and whole and quietly satisfied. The tent canvas moves gently overhead, responding to a light wind that carries no particular menace. Through the small gap at the entrance, you can see a scatter of stars, brilliant and cold and impossibly distant. You remember the first nights, when those stars seemed like the eyes of an indifferent universe, watching your struggle with cosmic detachment. Now they seem more like companions, fellow travelers through the long night, each maintaining their position, each offering their small light against the dark. You think about all the soldiers who have slept in tents in cold places, all the men and women throughout history who have lain down on frozen ground and pulled whatever covering they could find over themselves and trusted that they would wake to see another morning. You are part of that long lineage now, connected across time to countless others who faced similar challenges, who learned similar lessons, who discovered in themselves resources they did not know they possessed until circumstance demanded their revelation. There is comfort in this connection, in knowing that what you have experienced is both unique to you and shared by many. The specific details are yours, this tent, these companions, this particular stretch of frozen landscape. But the essential experience of endurance, adaptation, and ultimate survival is universal, repeated across cultures and centuries, a fundamental human story told in infinite variations. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you let them close. The darkness behind them is complete, restful, welcoming. You can still hear Osric breathing nearby, slow and steady, and the sound becomes a kind of anchor, a point of reference in the night. Your own breath gradually syncs with his, two rhythms finding harmony without intention or effort, and in this small synchronicity you find another kind of connection, another thread in the web that binds people together when they share difficult circumstances. Sleep begins to rise around you like water, gentle and inexorable. You do not fight it or hurry it, simply let it come in its own time, at its own pace. Your last conscious thoughts are fragmentary, disconnected. The warmth of the furs, the sound of canvas moving in wind, the memory of firelight on familiar faces, the distant gleam of stars through a tent opening. And then you are sleeping, deeply and dreamlessly, your body surrendered to the restorative darkness, your mind released from the constant low-level vigilance that has characterized your waking hours for weeks. You sleep as you have learned to sleep in this place, with the particular quality of rest that comes from having spent yourself fully during the day, from having nothing more to give and nothing more required. The night passes over you, over the camp, over the frozen landscape, moving in its ancient pattern from darkness toward dawn, from cold toward the promise of eventual warmth. The stars will slowly overhead, marking time in their eternal circuits. The wind rises and falls, speaking its wordless language to the canvas and the ice. The fires burn low, tended by those on watch, maintained against the possibility of sudden need. You sleep through all of it, held safe by the structures you and your companions have built and maintained, by the accumulated wisdom of soldiers who learn through trial and error how to survive in places that seem designed to resist human habitation. You sleep with the knowledge, buried deep in your resting consciousness, that you have done what was asked of you, that you have held the position, that you have earned this rest and this warmth and this peace. Hours pass unmeasured and unmarked. In the depths of the night, in the coldest hours before dawn, your sleeping body makes small adjustments, pulling the furs closer, shifting position, maintaining without conscious thought the careful balance between warmth and comfort that you have learned through long practice. These movements are automatic now, written into muscle memory, part of the body's own intelligence that operates beneath the level of awareness. And still you sleep, and still the night moves forward, and still the camp holds itself against the cold. This temporary human settlement, imposed on an indifferent landscape through will and effort and the stubborn insistence that people will go where they choose to go, will stay where they need to stay, will make homes however temporary in whatever circumstances require it. Toward morning, your sleep grows lighter, rising gradually toward waking though you are not yet conscious. Your mind begins to process the subtle signals that indicate dawn's approach. The slight change in temperature, the shifting quality of sound outside the tent, the body's own internal clock that has learned the rhythm of this place. But you do not wake, not yet. There is still time for rest, still a space between night and day where sleep can hold its gentle claim. And so you remain suspended in that peaceful state, neither fully asleep nor beginning to wake, balanced on the threshold, breathing slowly and steadily, your body warm beneath its layers of fur and wool, your mind quiet and still. Your presence here in this tent on this frozen ground a small, stubborn miracle of human adaptation and endurance. The first birds begin to call in the distance, their voices thin and clear in the cold air. Somewhere in the camp, someone rises and begins to tend a fire. The light beyond the canvas begins its slow transformation from black to gray. The new day assembles itself piece by piece, patient and inevitable. And you sleep on just a little longer, held in the good darkness, resting deeply, gathering strength for whatever comes next, trusting in the morning that you know will arrive, trusting in your own capacity to meet it, trusting in the warmth you have learned to build and maintain, trusting in the simple, profound fact that you are here, alive, enduring, and that this, after everything, is enough. The breath moves in and out of your lungs, steady and sure. The heart beats in your chest, faithful and strong. The blood moves through your veins, carrying warmth to every part of your body. You are a living being, resting in a cold place, and you have learned to do this well, learned to survive, and even to find moments of peace and beauty in circumstances that once seemed impossible. This knowledge, this competence, this quiet capability, these are the gifts of your time in this place, the lessons written not in books but in the body and the mind and the spirit. You carry them now, as surely as you carry your gear and your memories, and they will remain with you long after you have left this frozen landscape behind, long after the ice has melted and the spring has returned, long after these particular days have faded into the general past. But for now, for these last hours of darkness, for this final night in the tent on the ice, you simply rest. You sleep the sleep of someone who has earned their rest, who has nothing to prove and nothing to fear, who can surrender completely to the healing darkness and trust in the light that will inevitably follow. And the night holds you, and the tent shelters you, and the furs warm you, and your companions sleep nearby, and the camp maintains its watch, and the stars turn overhead, and the cold presses in but cannot reach you, and all is well, and all shall be well. And in this moment, in this place, in this deep and peaceful sleep, you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to do, which is simply to rest and to breathe, and to be. The darkness softens at its edges, preparing for dawn, but the transition is so gradual that it feels less like change and more like a slow revelation. The world emerging from shadow not through dramatic transformation, but through the patient accumulation of light, degree by degree, moment by moment, breath by breath. And still you sleep, and still you rest, and still the quiet peace holds, and the story of how soldiers sleep in tents upon the ice continues, as it has continued for centuries, as it will continue for as long as there are soldiers and cold places, and the human need to rest in difficult circumstances. And you are part of that story now, forever, your particular nights woven into the larger tapestry, your particular endurance added to the accumulated weight of human experience. And it is enough. And you are enough, and the morning will come, and you will wake, and you will meet whatever it brings, but for now, for just a little longer, you sleep and rest, and dream the quiet dreams of tired bodies in warm beds in cold places, and all is peaceful, and all is calm, and all is well.